I understand. Maybe next year. Goodbye. He said it was just a trip. Look at the photos, Mary. It's lovely. No, this is not a visit. This is placement. Look, there are so many open seats. Why didn't you come? Oh, I didn't realize there was so much room.
3 days before Thanksgiving,
Your late husband
my
left this
son
for you,
called
Mrs. Johnson.
and told me there was no room for me at his table.
He knew.
Rebecca's family is coming, and the house is going to be packed, Daniel said. Maybe you could finally spend the weekend in Charlottesville and check out that retirement community I sent you. I was 68 years old, recently widowed, and apparently the easiest person to remove from the holiday. So I went. What Daniel didn't know was that the place he wanted me to visit would reveal something he had been planning long before Thanksgiving. And by the time I came home, I would understand exactly why there had been room for everyone except me. Before I tell you what I discovered, if you've ever felt pushed aside by someone you love, tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. And if stories about family dignity and second chances mean something to you, please like and subscribe. I'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. The empty chair. After Daniel hung up, I stood in my kitchen with my phone still pressed against my palm. For several minutes, I didn't move. The refrigerator hummed behind me. The clock above the stove ticked steadily, almost offensively, as though nothing unusual had happened. Outside the window, the maple tree Robert had planted 23 years earlier had lost nearly all its leaves. 3 days before Thanksgiving, and my own son had just told me there was no room for me. I tried to make excuses for him. That was something I had become very good at since Robert died. Daniel had a demanding job. Rebecca had a large family. Their house would be busy. Holidays were complicated. Maybe somebody had decided to stay overnight at the last minute. There were dozens of reasonable explanations. The trouble was none of them made the words hurt less. Thanksgiving had once belonged to this house. For 37 years I had woken before sunrise on Thanksgiving morning and walked into this kitchen while the rest of the world was still dark. Robert always came downstairs 10 minutes later. Every year he pretended he had gotten up because he smelled coffee. Every year I pretended to believe him. He handled the turkey because he considered roasting a turkey a serious masculine responsibility. I handled everything else. Cornbread dressing, mashed potatoes, green beans with toasted almonds, sweet potatoes, cranberry sauce, and the pecan pie Daniel had loved since he was 7. When Daniel was a boy, he would sneak into the kitchen and steal pieces of crispy turkey skin. When he became a teenager, he slept until noon. When he came home from college, he brought laundry. When he brought Rebecca home for her first Thanksgiving with us, I remember Robert whispering to me while they were sitting in the living room, "He's going to marry that girl." I had smiled. "You've known her 4 hours. I know my son." Robert had been right. Then Sophie came along, followed 4 years later by Lucas, and Thanksgiving became noisy in the best possible way. There were fingerprints on the glass doors, toys under the dining table, arguments over who got the bigger piece of pie, and Robert pretending to be annoyed whenever the children climbed into his chair. I used to complain about how exhausted I was afterward. Now I would have given almost anything to be that tired again. Robert died 2 years earlier after 39 years of marriage. That first Thanksgiving without him nearly broke me. I had set the table automatically and placed his favorite water glass beside his plate before realizing what I had done. Daniel found me standing there staring at it. He didn't say anything. He simply walked over, removed the glass, and held me. That was the Daniel I kept remembering whenever something about him bothered me. The son who held his mother while she cried. The son who drove me to appointments after Robert died. The son who called every Sunday for months because he knew weekends were the hardest. So when Daniel suggested the following year that Thanksgiving move to his house, I agreed. "You shouldn't have to do all that cooking anymore, Mom," he told me. I thought it was sweet. I told myself traditions were supposed to change. Children grew up. Grandchildren became teenagers. One generation eventually stepped aside and allowed another to take over. I just hadn't realized stepping aside might eventually mean stepping out completely. I walked into my dining room. The table was still there, solid walnut scarred in 2 places from decades of family life. Robert and I had bought it when Daniel was 5. At the time, we could barely afford it. Robert insisted. A family needs a table big enough to come home to, he had said. I ran my fingers over the back of one chair. There were 8 chairs around that table. That suddenly seemed almost cruel. My phone buzzed. For one ridiculous second, hope jumped inside me. Maybe Daniel had reconsidered. Instead, the message was from Sophie. Grandma, I wish you were coming Thursday. I read it twice, then a third time. There was something about the wording that bothered me. Not I'm sorry you can't come. Not Dad told me the house is too crowded. I wish you were coming. I typed carefully. Me too, sweetheart. I hear you're going to have a full house. The typing bubbles appeared almost immediately. Yeah, I guess. Aunt Melissa and the twins are coming. Grandpa and Grandma Parker, too. Lucas says Thanksgiving is weird without you. I smiled despite myself. Tell Lucas Grandma said he has to eat at least one vegetable. Sophie sent a laughing emoji. Then another message appeared. Why aren't you coming anyway? My fingers stopped above the screen. I stared at those 5 words. Why aren't you coming anyway? Daniel apparently hadn't told his daughter the same story he had told me. I chose my words carefully. Your dad said things were going to be crowded this year. There was a longer pause. Then oh. That was all. Just oh. But sometimes one small word can open a door you were trying very hard to keep closed. Before I could ask anything else, my phone rang. Daniel. I looked at his name on the screen. Coincidence, I told myself. I answered. Hi, honey. Hey, Mom. His voice was too casual. You doing okay? I'm fine. Sophie text you. There it was. Yes. What did she say? I leaned against the kitchen counter. She said she wished I was coming. Daniel exhaled. She's 16. Everything becomes emotional with her. I almost laughed at the irony. I didn't think she was being emotional. Well, I just don't want you feeling guilty. This year is complicated. I'm not feeling guilty. There was a pause. Good. Then his voice brightened. Actually, I was thinking about what we talked about. Charlottesville could be really nice for you this weekend. Again, Blue Ridge Haven. Daniel had first mentioned the place about 6 months earlier. At the time, I barely paid attention. It was an upscale retirement community outside Charlottesville with private condominiums, walking trails, a fitness center, dining facilities, and maintenance services. Not a nursing home, not assisted living. Just a place marketed to older people who wanted fewer responsibilities. Daniel had emailed me the brochure. Rebecca had mentioned it twice. I had said it looked lovely and forgotten about it. Apparently Daniel had not. You've been wanting me to see that place for a while, I said. I just think it makes sense. For what, or the future? I looked around my kitchen. What's wrong with my future here? Nothing, Mom. Don't make it sound like that. I'm asking. He sighed. You're 68. You're alone in a 4-bedroom house. The yard is huge. The roof is going to need work eventually. Property taxes keep going up. I frowned. When did you become so interested in my property taxes? I'm your son. I worry. That answer should have comforted me. Instead, it landed strangely. Daniel continued. Blue Ridge Haven handles maintenance. You'd have people around. Activities, restaurants. And you'd still have your own place. I already have my own place. You know what I mean. Yes, I did. And for the first time, I began remembering all the little conversations I had dismissed over the previous months. Daniel asking how much I paid the landscaper. Rebecca casually mentioning that homes in my neighborhood were selling quickly. Daniel asking whether I really used the upstairs bedrooms anymore. Rebecca commenting that maintaining a house this size must be exhausting at your age. None of those conversations had seemed alarming by themselves. Together they suddenly formed a pattern I couldn't quite understand. I'll think about Charlottesville, I said. Really? His enthusiasm was immediate. Too immediate. Maybe. You should go. Seriously. Make a weekend of it. There are some beautiful inns nearby. I thought you were worried about me being alone. That's different. How? Another pause. Mom. I'm trying to help. I closed my eyes. Perhaps he was. I wanted desperately to believe that. Okay, I said. I'll look into it. Great. That one word carried a relief I wasn't expecting. After we hung up, I returned to the dining room. The late afternoon sunlight stretched across the table, catching tiny scratches accumulated through almost 4 decades. I pulled out Robert's old chair and sat down. For a moment, I imagined him across from me. He had always been better at recognizing trouble before I did. I was the one who believed explanations. Robert watched patterns. "What would you think?" I whispered. Of course, the room gave me no answer. Then my phone buzzed again. Sophie. "Grandma." "Yes, sweetheart." Her reply came quickly. "I asked Dad why you weren't coming. He just said you had other plans." I stared at the message until the words blurred. Other plans. 10 minutes earlier, I hadn't had any. Daniel knew that. He had been the one suggesting I make them. I put the phone down. For the first time since his call, the pain of being excluded began giving way to something else. Suspicion. Maybe there really wasn't room for me at Thanksgiving. But I was beginning to wonder whether the problem had ever been the number of chairs. And suddenly I wanted to know why my son seemed so determined to send me somewhere else. I booked the weekend. By Tuesday morning, I had made a decision. I was going to Charlottesville. Not because Daniel wanted me there. That distinction mattered more than I expected. I wasn't going to spend Thanksgiving sitting in my Richmond house, staring at an empty dining table, imagining my family laughing somewhere else. And I wasn't going to drive to Daniel's house and force my way into a gathering where my presence had clearly become inconvenient. If my son wanted me somewhere else, then somewhere else was exactly where I would go. But I would go on my terms. The first person I called was Patricia Collins. Patricia and I had been friends for more than 25 years. We met when we were both volunteering at a school fundraiser, when Daniel was still young enough to complain about having his mother anywhere near his classroom. Patricia had one quality Robert always appreciated. She said the thing everyone else was too polite to say. When I finished telling her about Daniel's call, Sophie's messages, and Blue Ridge Haven, Patricia was silent for several seconds. Then she said, "Evelyn, that's nonsense. What is no room? Rebecca has a large family." So Patricia, "No, I'm serious. Daniel has a 4-bedroom house with a finished basement." "I know. And his mother can't fit anywhere," I sighed. "It may be more complicated. Complicated is deciding who gets the guest bedroom. Complicated is putting an air mattress in the office. Complicated is asking someone to stay at a hotel nearby." She paused. "Telling your mother not to come is something else." The words hurt because I had been carefully avoiding saying them to myself. He didn't tell me not to come. What exactly did he say? That there wasn't room. "Evelyn." I closed my eyes. "I know." Patricia's voice softened. "Did you ask him why he said Rebecca's family was coming?" "All of Rebecca's family. Her parents. Her sister Melissa. Melissa's twins. And where are they sleeping, I don't know. That's the point." I walked toward the window overlooking my backyard. The grass was covered with brown leaves. Robert would have been outside complaining about them while secretly enjoying himself. "I don't want to turn this into something ugly if it isn't," I said. "I'm not telling you to start a war. I'm telling you not to explain away something that hurt you just because Daniel is your son." That sentence stayed with me. For years I had believed protecting family meant assuming the best. Maybe sometimes it did. But perhaps there was a difference between assuming the best and refusing to see what was directly in front of you. "So what do you think I should do?" I asked. "Go. To Charlottesville, yes." That surprised me. "I thought you hated the idea." "I hate Daniel deciding where you should spend Thanksgiving. That doesn't mean Charlottesville did anything wrong." I laughed. Patricia continued. "Book yourself a beautiful room. Order something expensive. Drink wine if you want. Tour that retirement place if you're curious. But don't go because your son is sending you away." Her voice became firmer. "Go because you decided to." That afternoon, I booked 3 nights at a small inn outside Charlottesville. The photographs showed a brick building surrounded by bare oak trees, fireplaces in the common rooms, and a dining room offering Thanksgiving dinner. It looked peaceful. When the confirmation arrived, I felt something unexpected. Relief. For the first time since Daniel's call, Thanksgiving no longer felt like something happening to me. I had made a choice. I printed the reservation and carried it upstairs to my bedroom. That was when I noticed the Blue Ridge Haven brochure sitting on the desk. Daniel had mailed me a printed copy months earlier, even though he had already emailed it. I picked it up. On the cover was a silver-haired couple walking along a landscaped path beneath the Blue Ridge Mountains. Live your next chapter your way. I almost laughed. My way, I murmured. Apparently everyone had an opinion about what my way should look like. I opened my laptop. I intended only to find Blue Ridge Haven's address and see whether tours were available over Thanksgiving weekend. Instead, I found myself searching through old emails from Daniel. There were more than I remembered. The first was from May. Mom thought you might find this interesting. Places like this are becoming really popular for active retirees. Attached was the Blue Ridge Haven website. I had replied, "Looks lovely. I'm not ready to move anywhere, though." Daniel's answer had been cheerful. "No pressure, just thinking ahead." June brought another email. This one contained an article about Richmond real estate prices. "Your neighborhood is doing incredibly well. Have you ever had the house valued recently?" At the time, I had answered without suspicion. "A realtor gave us an estimate after your father died. I'm not planning to sell." Then July. "Do you know what you're paying annually for maintenance now? Landscaping, repairs, insurance, taxes, all of it. August. "Do you really use the upstairs anymore? September. "Rebecca says houses near you are selling fast. Might be worth knowing your options while the market is strong." And October. "Have you ever thought about how much equity is sitting in that house? You could unlock it and make life a lot easier." I leaned back in my chair. Individually, every message could be explained as concern. Together, they felt different. My house wasn't simply a place Daniel thought might be too large for me. He had been thinking about its value, repeatedly. I tried to remember whether I had ever told him exactly how much money Robert and I had in savings. I couldn't recall. Then I felt guilty for even thinking that way. This was my son, the boy whose fever I had sat beside all night when he was 9. The young man Robert and I had helped through college. The father who still called me when Sophie received an award at school because he knew I wanted every detail. Suspicion felt like betrayal. But so did Thanksgiving. I returned to the search results and typed Blue Ridge Haven into my email. 6 messages appeared. I opened the most recent one. Daniel had forwarded it 3 weeks earlier. "Mom, take another look. This is the place I was talking about. Rebecca says the market around Richmond may soften next year, so timing could matter if you ever decide to downsize." Below his message was a forwarded promotional email from Blue Ridge Haven. I scrolled. Floor plans, amenities, monthly fees, available units, nothing unusual. Then I reached the bottom. There was another message beneath it, a fragment of an earlier conversation. Apparently Daniel had forwarded the chain without removing everything below. The message was from Daniel to Rebecca. It was short. "Did you send me the updated pricing? If Mom likes it, everything gets easier." I stopped breathing for a moment. I read it again. "If Mom likes it, everything gets easier. Not things get easier for Mom. Not her life gets easier. Everything." I checked the date. 3 weeks earlier. Long before Daniel told me there was no room at Thanksgiving. I scrolled further, hoping there would be more context. Nothing. Just Rebecca's earlier message, sending it now. "Look at the 2-bedroom options." 2-bedroom options. They had been discussing which units I might live in, without me. I closed the laptop. My first instinct was to call Daniel immediately, ask him what everything meant. Ask why Rebecca was researching floor plans for a home I had never said I wanted. Ask why my house, my equity, and my future seemed to be topics of conversation between them. But then I remembered Robert. Whenever we faced something confusing, Robert had a rule. Don't ask a question until you're ready to hear an answer. He believed people often confronted too early. They revealed what they knew and gave the other person an opportunity to prepare an explanation. I had always teased him about being suspicious. That afternoon I wished he were sitting beside me, so I didn't call Daniel. Instead, I opened Blue Ridge Haven's website. There was a number for prospective residents. I dialed. A cheerful woman answered. "Blue Ridge Haven, this is Allison. How may I help you?" "My name is Evelyn Martinez. I'm going to be in Charlottesville over Thanksgiving weekend, and I wondered whether you offer tours on Friday." "Absolutely. She asked a few questions: my age, whether I was looking for independent living, whether I preferred 1 or 2 bedrooms. I'm not actually sure I'm looking for anything, I admitted. My son recommended your community. That happens all the time, she said warmly. Sometimes family members discover us first. Something about that sentence made my fingers tighten around the phone. Does Friday at 11 work? Yes. She took my email address and confirmed the appointment. When we finished, I returned to Daniel's message. If Mom likes it, everything gets easier. I printed that email. I wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe I wanted proof that I hadn't imagined it. Maybe I wanted something physical in my hand. I placed it inside my purse. Later that evening, Daniel called. Hey Mom, how are you? I'm good. You decide what you're doing. Thursday I did. There was a brief silence. Oh, I booked a little inn outside Charlottesville. His response came instantly. That's great. Too quickly again. I'll be there until Sunday. You'll love it. It's beautiful this time of year. I also scheduled a tour of Blue Ridge Haven. This time his reaction was unmistakable. Really? There was excitement in his voice. Relief, too. Yes, that's fantastic, Mom. Fantastic. Not nice, not interesting. Fantastic. I'm only looking, I reminded him. Of course, no pressure. I almost asked him then. Everything gets easier for whom, Daniel? But I stopped myself. Instead, I said, I'll tell you what I think afterward. Definitely. We talked for another minute about traffic and weather. Before hanging up, Daniel said something that sounded ordinary. Keep an open mind. Okay, I promised I would. After the call, I stood in the hallway looking at a framed photograph of Robert. It had been taken on our 35th anniversary. He was smiling at the camera. I touched the edge of the frame. I'm keeping an open mind, I whispered. But I'm keeping my eyes open too. The next morning I packed my suitcase. 3 sweaters, 2 pairs of comfortable shoes, a black dress for Thanksgiving dinner, Robert's old wool scarf because I still wore it when I missed him. And inside my purse, folded between my reservation and wallet, I placed the email Daniel never meant for me to notice. If Mom likes it, everything gets easier. I still didn't know what everything meant. But I was beginning to understand something important. My Thanksgiving trip wasn't just a weekend away anymore. Somewhere in Charlottesville was a place my son desperately wanted me to like, and I intended to find out why. The place he wanted. I left Richmond early Wednesday morning with Robert's wool scarf folded on the passenger seat beside me. For the first 40 minutes I drove in silence. No radio, no podcast, no cheerful holiday music telling me it was the most wonderful time of the year, just the road stretching west and the low November sun moving through bare trees. Robert and I had made that drive many times. Charlottesville had been one of our favorite weekend escapes. We would leave Richmond after breakfast, stop somewhere for coffee, wander through bookstores, and argue about where to eat dinner as if the decision carried national importance. Robert always wanted steak. I always wanted something lighter. We usually ate steak. Thinking about those trips should have made me sad. Instead, somewhere along Interstate 64, I felt something inside me loosen. For 2 days I had been thinking of myself as the mother who had been excluded from Thanksgiving. But watching the Blue Ridge Mountains slowly appear in the distance, I remembered that I was also Evelyn Martinez. I had worked for 34 years. I had raised a child. I had buried a husband and learned how to wake up alone afterward. I paid my own bills, managed my own investments, scheduled my own repairs, drove my own car, and made my own decisions. Daniel might have suggested this trip. He did not own it. By the time I reached the inn, I felt steadier. The building was even prettier than the photographs. Red brick white columns, rocking chairs on the porch, and oak trees scattered across the property. A fire burned in the lobby. The woman at reception handed me my room key and explained that Thanksgiving dinner would begin at 4 the following afternoon. We'll have plenty of food, she said. So come hungry. Plenty of food, plenty of room. I smiled at the irony. My Blue Ridge Haven tour wasn't until Friday, which gave me Thanksgiving Day to myself. I intended to enjoy it, but Daniel's email stayed in my mind. If Mom likes it, everything gets easier. Friday morning arrived cold and clear. I almost canceled the tour. Part of me wondered whether going meant allowing Daniel to manipulate me. Then I reminded myself why I had come. Information. Nothing more. Blue Ridge Haven was about 15 minutes from the inn. As I turned through its stone entrance, I immediately understood why Daniel had chosen it. It was beautiful. Not beautiful in the sterile way I had expected from a retirement community. Beautiful like an expensive resort. Low stone buildings sat among mature trees. Walking paths curved around landscaped gardens. A clubhouse overlooked a small lake, and several residents were sitting outside beneath patio heaters drinking coffee. A sign pointed toward fitness center, dining library, and resident services. I parked near the sales office. For a moment I sat in my car. I thought about my house in Richmond. The upstairs bedroom where Robert had slept beside me for almost 4 decades. The kitchen cabinet door he had promised to repair before getting sick. The pencil marks inside the pantry where we had measured Daniel's height. Homes carried more than market value. They carried evidence. I went inside. A woman in her early 50s approached me with a warm smile. "Mrs. Martinez." "Yes, I'm Allison Grant. We spoke on the phone. We shook hands. I'm glad you could come. Thank you for seeing me on a holiday weekend." "Oh, Friday after Thanksgiving is actually busy for us. Families are together. People start talking about next chapters." Next chapters. I had seen those words on the brochure. Allison offered me coffee, then opened a folder. "Before we start, I just want to confirm a few details." She looked at her computer. "Evelyn Martinez, Richmond." "That's right." Her expression changed slightly. "Oh, it was small, but I noticed." "What?" She smiled. "Nothing bad. I think we may already have some information on you." My stomach tightened. "What kind of information?" She clicked something. "Your son contacted us." I stared at her. "My son?" "Yes. Daniel." For half a second I considered pretending I knew. Instead I asked when Allison looked uncertain. "I'd have to check the exact dates. A few inquiries over the last couple of months, I believe." "Months. Not weeks. Months." Daniel had never told me he had contacted them. "I see." Allison apparently mistook my silence for approval. "He seems very involved. That can be helpful when families are planning a transition." A transition. Another word I had never agreed to. "What exactly did Daniel ask you?" Her smile faded slightly. "General questions mostly, such as..." She glanced at the screen again. "Availability, pricing, timing." Then she brightened. "And Unit 214, of course." I felt a cold sensation move through me. "Unit 214. Yes." I kept my voice neutral. "Remind me about that one." Allison turned the folder toward me. 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, approximately 1,400 square feet. Corner unit. Mountain-facing balcony. It was one of the options your son seemed most interested in. My son seemed most interested in. Not me. Daniel. How interested? Allison hesitated. "Mrs. Martinez, I don't want to speak out of turn." "You're not. I'm simply trying to understand what has already been discussed." That seemed to reassure her. She began scrolling through notes. "He asked about the deposit structure." I waited. Whether deposits were refundable, how quickly someone could close after selecting a unit, whether a purchase could be contingent on the sale of another residence. My hands were folded in my lap. I kept them there. What else? He asked about bridge financing. I knew what that meant. Short-term financing that could help someone purchase one property before another sold. My mouth went dry. "Did he tell you I was selling my house?" "Not exactly." The answer came too carefully. "What did he say?" Allison looked uncomfortable now. "He said you owned a home in Richmond and might be ready to downsize." Might be ready. I had told Daniel repeatedly that I wasn't. He also asked whether family members could help with paperwork if the process felt overwhelming. I looked directly at her. "Overwhelming for whom?" "For you, I assumed." I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, because the alternative was anger. "Did Daniel tell you I have difficulty managing paperwork?" "Num." Did he tell you I have any medical condition that prevents me from making decisions? No, absolutely not. Good. Allison closed the folder slightly. I hope I haven't upset you. You haven't. That was true. She hadn't created the situation. She was simply revealing it. My son and I apparently have different definitions of planning ahead. Allison nodded sympathetically. That happens more than you might think. I believed her. Can I see Unit 244? Of course. We crossed the property in a golf cart. Allison pointed out the dining room fitness center art studio, walking trails, library, and shuttle service into Charlottesville. I had to admit it was impressive. That made everything stranger. If Daniel had simply said, Mom, there's a beautiful place I think you might enjoy seeing someday, I might have appreciated it. But he hadn't simply recommended it. He had researched deposits, financing, sale contingencies, paperwork. He had constructed the beginning of a move I had never chosen. Unit 214 was on the second floor of a stone building overlooking the mountains. When Allison opened the door, sunlight filled the living room. The kitchen had granite counters and stainless steel appliances. The primary bedroom had large windows. The balcony faced rolling hills in the distance. It was beautiful. I hated that it was beautiful, because Daniel could point to every feature and say, see, I was right. But the question had never been whether Blue Ridge Haven was nice. The question was, why my son needed me to want it. Allison opened the balcony door. Your son especially liked this unit because it's available now. I turned. He said that he asked whether we could hold it through December if necessary. My heartbeat changed. Why December, I'm not sure. She thought for a moment. He mentioned wanting the timing to work. There it was again. Timing. Rebecca's email had mentioned updated pricing. Daniel had written that everything would become easier if I liked the place. Now I learned he had asked Blue Ridge Haven about holding a specific unit through December. I stepped onto the balcony. The mountains stretched across the horizon. Robert would have loved the view. For one dangerous moment I wondered whether I was being unfair. Maybe Daniel truly believed this would be better for me. Maybe he was simply planning too aggressively because he cared. Then Allison said something behind me. Selling a long-time home can be emotional, but it sounds like your family has already done quite a bit of preparation. I turned slowly. What preparation? She froze. I just meant no. Please. I kept my voice gentle. What gave you that impression? She looked back toward the living room, then at me. Your son seemed to have a fairly clear idea of the value of your current property. A chill passed through me. How clear I don't remember the exact number. Approximately. She hesitated. Somewhere in the high 700s. My house had been valued at roughly $780,000 after Robert died. I had never told Blue Ridge Haven that. Daniel had. I thanked Allison and finished the tour without asking more questions. Before leaving, she handed me a packet about Unit 214. No pressure, she said. Those were the same words Daniel had used. I smiled politely. I'm learning to be very careful whenever someone says that. She looked confused, but I didn't explain. Back in my car, I placed the packet on the passenger's seat beside Robert's scarf. I didn't start the engine. Instead, I took out my phone and opened Daniel's email again. If Mom likes it, everything gets easier. For the first time, I stopped focusing on the first half. I focused on the second. Everything gets easier. Selling my house, freeing the equity, timing the purchase. Whatever Daniel and Rebecca were planning, Blue Ridge Haven wasn't the goal. It was a step. And I had the growing feeling that the most important part of their plan wasn't where I would live after leaving Richmond. It was what would happen to my house once I did. Thanksgiving without me. Thanksgiving morning began with silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that makes you notice every sound, because there aren't enough of them. I woke just after 7 and lay beneath the heavy white comforter at the inn, staring at a ceiling I had never seen before. For one confused second, I expected to hear Robert downstairs opening cabinet doors too loudly while pretending he wasn't looking for the roasting pan. Then I remembered. Robert was gone. I was in Charlottesville. And somewhere back in Richmond, my family was preparing Thanksgiving dinner without me. I reached for my phone. There were already messages waiting. Patricia had sent Happy Thanksgiving. And before you start feeling sorry for everybody else, remember you deserve a good day too. I smiled. Another message came from a former coworker. Then one from my neighbor. Then Lucas. Happy Thanksgiving, Grandma. I miss your pie. That one hurt. I replied, Happy Thanksgiving, sweetheart. I miss you too. Save some room for dessert. A few minutes later, Daniel texted, Happy Thanksgiving, Mom. Hope Charlottesville is nice. That was it. No phone call. No wish you were here. No, I'm sorry. Just hope Charlottesville is nice. I put the phone face down. I refused to spend the morning waiting for people who had already decided how they wanted to spend theirs. So I got dressed, wrapped Robert's scarf around my neck, and went downstairs. The inn had coffee and pastries in the lobby. Several guests were sitting near the fireplace. A woman about my age invited me to share her table when she noticed I was alone. Her name was Helen. She was from Maryland and visiting her sister. We talked about books, grandchildren, bad knees, and how hotel coffee somehow managed to taste identical in every state. She never asked why I was alone. I appreciated that. Around 11, I walked through downtown Charlottesville. Stores were mostly closed, but the streets were beautiful. The cold air sharpened everything. I thought about the previous day's tour. Unit 214, the deposit, bridge financing, the value of my Richmond house, the timing Daniel wanted to make work. I had spent half the night trying to invent an innocent explanation. Maybe Daniel had been researching everything because he wanted to save me trouble. Maybe Rebecca's profession made her naturally curious about property values. Maybe everything gets easier simply meant my life would become easier if I downsized. Every explanation required me to ignore something, and I was becoming tired of doing that. At 4, I went downstairs for Thanksgiving dinner. The dining room had been decorated with small pumpkins, candles, and autumn leaves. There were no assigned seats. The hostess smiled when I gave my room number. Party of 1. Yes. She looked around. We have a community table if you'd rather not eat alone. I almost said no. Then I remembered Patricia's voice. Go because you decided to. The community table sounds nice. I was seated with 6 strangers. A retired teacher from Ohio, a widower visiting Monticello, 2 sisters from North Carolina, Helen and her brother-in-law. Within 15 minutes we were passing rolls and comparing family recipes. It wasn't my Thanksgiving, but it was still Thanksgiving, and there was room for me. That thought had barely formed when my phone vibrated inside my purse. Sophie, can I FaceTime you? I excused myself and stepped into the hallway. I answered. Sophie's face filled the screen. Grandma behind her, I heard voices, dishes, laughter. Happy Thanksgiving, sweetheart. Happy Thanksgiving. Look. She turned the phone. For several seconds I saw Daniel's dining room. The long table had been extended. Rebecca was carrying a bowl from the kitchen. Lucas waved when he saw the phone. Grandma, hi, sweetheart. Then Sophie turned the camera again. I recognized Rebecca's parents. Her sister Melissa. The twins. A couple I didn't know. The house was busy. But something immediately bothered me. There were empty spaces. Not necessarily at the dining table, but everywhere else. The living room wasn't crowded. The finished basement stairs were visible behind Sophie. Daniel's office door stood open. And I knew there was a pull-out sofa in that room because Robert and I had slept on it once after a snowstorm. Sophie, I asked carefully, where is everyone sleeping tonight? She shrugged. Aunt Melissa and the twins are downstairs. And your grandparents, Grandma and Grandpa Parker. Yes. They're at the Marriott. I went very still. At the Marriott. Yeah. They stayed there last night too. Grandpa likes hotel breakfast. I nearly laughed. Daniel had told me there was no room because Rebecca's family was staying. Her parents weren't even staying in the house. Who's in the guest bedroom? Nobody, I think. The answer landed harder than I expected. There had been a room. An actual empty room. Maybe Daniel could have invented another explanation. Maybe someone had canceled. Maybe plans had changed. But combined with everything else, the lie was becoming impossible to ignore. Lucas suddenly appeared beside Sophie. Grandma, why didn't you come? Sophie elbowed him. What? He looked genuinely confused. Dad said she wanted to go on vacation. I felt something break quietly inside me. Not dramatically. No tears. No anger. Just a small internal crack. Daniel hadn't merely excluded me. He had rewritten the story. He had told his children that I chose not to be there. I did want to see Charlottesville, I said gently. And I'm having a nice time. That part was true. Lucas frowned. But you always come. I know. Are you coming Christmas? Before I could answer, Daniel appeared in the background. His expression changed the moment he saw me on Sophie's phone. Soph. What dinner? We're talking to Grandma. I can see that. He approached. For one uncomfortable second, Daniel and I looked at each other through the screen. Hey, Mom. Happy Thanksgiving. Having a good time, I am. Good. His eyes moved toward Sophie. Let Grandma get back to her dinner. I understood the message. End the call. But Sophie wasn't finished. Wait, Grandma. I have to show you the pie Mom bought because Lucas says yours is better. Sophie. Daniel's voice was sharper. She ignored him and carried the phone toward the kitchen. I caught another view of the house. Coats piled near the entrance, serving dishes everywhere. Rebecca's father opening wine. Normal Thanksgiving chaos. There was no emergency. No impossible overcrowding. Just a family gathering from which I had been deliberately removed. Sophie showed me the pie. It looks wonderful, I said. It's from the grocery store, Lucas announced. Traitor, Sophie whispered. I laughed. Then Sophie said, after dinner we have to go downstairs because the adults are having their boring money meeting. The laughter died in my throat. What money meeting? Sophie shrugged. I don't know. Dad told us we have to watch a movie downstairs. Daniel's voice came immediately. Sophie, what enough? But she kept talking. Grandpa Parker brought papers. My pulse began beating harder. What kind of papers, I don't know. Daniel stepped closer. Mom, I'll call you later. I ignored him. Sophie, sweetheart, what did you hear? She looked confused by my tone. Nothing really. Then she thought for a second. Just stuff about the house. Daniel's face changed. Sophie. She turned toward him. What house? I asked. Sophie looked back at the screen. Yours. The hallway around me seemed to disappear. My house. Yeah. She said it with complete innocence. Did Dad tell you they were going to talk about selling your house after dinner? For a moment I couldn't speak. I heard the inn around me. Silverware. Conversation. Someone laughing near the dining room. But all I could see was my granddaughter's face. Then Daniel reached for the phone. Sophie, give me that. The screen shifted. Suddenly Daniel was looking directly at me. Mom. His voice was low. I had known that voice since he was a teenager. It was the voice he used when he had been caught somewhere between truth and explanation. What is Sophie talking about? I asked. It's nothing. Then it should be easy to explain. We're having Thanksgiving dinner. So am I. Can we not do this right now? I almost smiled. That was an extraordinary thing to hear from a man who apparently planned to discuss selling my home without me. Daniel, are you discussing my house tonight? He glanced away from the phone. Someone behind him said something I couldn't hear. Mom, nobody is selling anything. That wasn't my question. Another pause. We're just talking. About my house. About options. Options. There was that language again. Planning, timing, downsizing. Options. Words designed to sound harmless while other people discussed my life. I could have demanded answers. Instead, I heard Robert's voice in my memory. Facts first. So I said, enjoy your dinner, Daniel. Mom, I mean it. We'll talk later. I asked him to give the phone back to Sophie. He hesitated, then did. I smiled at my granddaughter. You didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart. She looked worried. Are you mad? Not at you. Okay. Go eat your Thanksgiving dinner. Love you, Grandma. I love you too. The call ended. I stood alone in the hallway for almost a minute. Then I walked back into the dining room. My plate was still waiting. Turkey, dressing, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce. The retired teacher beside me smiled. Everything okay? I looked down at the empty chair across from me. For the first time, I understood what had really happened. Daniel's house had never run out of room. There had been a guest bedroom. There had been a hotel. There had been chairs. What Daniel had needed was a Thanksgiving table where a conversation about my future could happen without the inconvenience of my voice. And suddenly the question was no longer why my son had sent me to Charlottesville. The question was what he intended to do with the life I left behind, if I stayed there. The conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I barely tasted the rest of my Thanksgiving dinner. I stayed at the community table because leaving would have felt like surrendering the evening to Daniel. So I smiled when someone passed the pie. I listened to Helen tell a story about her grandson trying to deep fry a turkey 5 years earlier. I even laughed when the retired teacher across from me announced that canned cranberry sauce was an insult to cranberries everywhere. From the outside, I probably looked perfectly fine. Inside, I kept hearing Sophie's question. Did Dad tell you they were going to talk about selling your house after dinner? My house. Not Daniel's, not Rebecca's, mine. The house Robert and I had spent 32 years paying for. The house where Daniel had taken his first steps after we moved to Richmond. The house where Robert died. And somewhere back in Richmond, people were apparently discussing its future, while I sat 2 hours away eating Thanksgiving dinner with strangers. At 7:23 my phone buzzed. Sophie. I waited until I was back in my room before opening the message. Sorry if I made Dad mad. My heart sank. I typed immediately. You didn't do anything wrong. Please don't worry about it. 3 dots appeared. Then, he's not mad at me. Mom just said I shouldn't talk about grown-up money stuff. I sat on the edge of the bed. That was probably true. A 16-year-old shouldn't have been dragged into adult financial problems. But Sophie hadn't dragged herself into anything. She had simply overheard a conversation adults assumed would remain private. I wrote, Your mom is right that you shouldn't have to worry about adult finances. Go enjoy your evening. I expected that to end it. Instead, another message appeared. They're still talking. I stared at the screen. About what I deleted the question before sending it. I would not interrogate my granddaughter. Whatever Daniel had done, Sophie was not going to become my source of intelligence. Then she sent another message without being asked. I think it's about you moving. My stomach tightened. Why do you think that? Because Dad said you probably won't be in Richmond much longer. I read the sentence twice. Probably won't be in Richmond much longer. Daniel had spoken as though a decision had already been made. I had never told him I was leaving Richmond. I had never told anyone I was selling my house. Until that morning, I hadn't even visited Blue Ridge Haven. Sophie continued. Grandma Parker asked what your house was worth, and Mom said maybe $780,000. I stood up. The number was almost exactly what the realtor had estimated after Robert died. I walked toward the window and looked down at the dark parking lot. Rebecca knew real estate. She could have estimated the value herself, but the precision bothered me. I returned to the bed. Sophie sent one final message. Then Mom said if you downsized it would free everyone up. I don't know what that means, neither did I, but I knew what the words sounded like. Money. I typed, don't worry about any of that, sweetheart. It's adult business and I'll handle anything involving my home. Go watch your movie with Lucas. Okay, love you too. I put the phone down. For perhaps 30 seconds I simply sat there. Then anger arrived. Not the hot kind, the cold kind. The kind that makes everything suddenly clear. Daniel had told other people I probably wouldn't remain in Richmond. Rebecca had discussed the value of my house. They had talked about what would happen financially after I downsized. And they had intentionally held that conversation on the Thanksgiving from which I had been excluded. My first instinct was to call Daniel. I picked up my phone, then stopped. Robert would have hated what I was about to do. Not because he would have defended Daniel. Because Robert never believed in confronting someone before understanding the facts. Years earlier, when one of his business partners had made a questionable decision, Robert spent 3 days quietly reviewing contracts before saying a word. I had accused him of being overly cautious. He told me anger asks questions. Facts already know the answers. I put my phone down. Fine, Robert, I whispered. Facts. There was one person I trusted with facts. Richard Coleman. Richard had been our attorney for nearly 20 years. He handled the purchase of a small rental property Robert and I once owned, helped us sell it, prepared our wills, and eventually organized our estate plan. After Robert died, Richard helped me through the legal details I could barely process through grief. I checked the time. 8:15 on Thanksgiving night. Calling him felt inappropriate. Then I remembered Richard had once told me that if I ever had a serious question involving my property or estate, I should call. I sent a text instead. Richard, this is Evelyn Martinez. I'm sorry to bother you on Thanksgiving. Something has come up involving my house and Daniel. Nothing is an emergency tonight, but I need to speak with you when you're available. He called 11 minutes later. Evelyn, I'm sorry. Stop apologizing. Are you safe? Yes. Is anyone at your house? Not that I know of. Has anything been signed? No. Have you given Daniel power of attorney? No. His questions came quickly enough to frighten me. Richard, what exactly do you think is happening? I don't think anything yet. Tell me what happened. So I did. I told him about Thanksgiving, about Daniel saying there was no room, about Blue Ridge Haven, about Unit 214, about Daniel contacting the community without telling me, about bridge financing and the questions regarding selling my Richmond home. I read him the email. If Mom likes it, everything gets easier. Then I told him what Sophie had overheard. When I reached the $780,000 estimate, Richard became very quiet. Are you still in Charlottesville? Yes. When are you coming home Sunday? Good. Don't change your plans. That surprised me. You don't think I should go back tomorrow, no? Why? Because nothing you've described requires immediate action, and going home angry may cause you to confront Daniel before we understand what he's doing. Robert would have approved. Richard continued. Until we speak, I want you to promise me a few things. All right. Do not sign anything Daniel or Rebecca gives you. I won't. Do not send them bank statements, investment statements, tax returns, or any other financial records. I wouldn't. Do not authorize Rebecca to list your house. I haven't. Good. Don't agree verbally either. My stomach tightened. Richard, they can't sell my house without me. No. His answer was immediate. Absolutely not. I exhaled. But he continued. I don't like people discussing a client's property as though the client has already made a decision. Neither do I. Has Daniel asked you directly for money recently? Number loans. Number has he mentioned investment opportunities? I thought, not really. Business problems, no. Another pause. Rebecca, nothing. Richard sighed. Then we need more information. I looked toward the folder from Blue Ridge Haven lying on the desk. Richard, am I overreacting? No. The certainty in his voice surprised me. You may eventually discover an innocent explanation for some of this. I hope you do. But asking questions about your property is not overreacting. I felt tears pressing behind my eyes. I don't want to think badly of my son. I know. He's been good to me. I know that too. I keep wondering whether I'm turning normal concern into something ugly because I'm hurt about Thanksgiving. Richard was silent for a moment. Then he said, Evelyn being hurt doesn't make facts disappear. I closed my eyes. There it was again. Facts. I'll come to your office Monday. Yes. 10 o'clock. That works. I expected the conversation to end. Instead, Richard said, one more thing. Something in his tone changed. What has Daniel mentioned? The Martinez family trust? I opened my eyes. The trust, yes. Not since Robert died. Nothing recently. No. Has he asked who controls it? No. Has he asked what happens if you sell the Richmond house? I sat straighter. No. Richard didn't respond. Why are you asking? I want to review the most recent trust documents before Monday. I thought you had them. I do. Then what are you reviewing? A long silence followed. Richard. When Robert and I updated the estate plan, he made several provisions involving the house. My hand tightened around the phone. What provisions? I'd rather explain them when I have the documents in front of me. Do they involve Daniel? Another pause. Yes. A chill moved through me. What did Robert do? Nothing that limits you. That distinction mattered. It was designed to protect you. From what Richard exhaled slowly. From pressure. I didn't speak. Robert had been dead for 2 years. Yet suddenly it felt as though he had stepped into the room. What kind of pressure? I whispered. Richard answered carefully. The kind that can happen when someone begins treating a future inheritance as though it already belongs to them. My heart dropped. Are you saying Robert expected Daniel to do this? I'm saying Robert worried about certain patterns. What patterns? Monday, Evelyn. I wanted to demand an answer. But Richard knew Robert's estate plan better than anyone except Robert himself. All right. Enjoy the rest of your weekend if you can. I almost laughed. I'll try. And Evelyn. Yes, your home is yours. Your decisions are yours. Nothing about being someone's mother changes that. After we hung up, I walked to the window. Charlottesville glittered faintly beyond the trees. Somewhere 2 hours away, Daniel was probably finishing Thanksgiving with his family. Perhaps he believed I knew nothing. Perhaps he believed I was admiring Unit 214 and imagining my new life there. I looked at the Blue Ridge Haven folder, then at Robert's scarf draped across the chair. Until that night, I had thought my husband's estate plan was simply paperwork designed to make life easier after death. Now I understood Robert had been preparing for something else, something he had seen coming long before I did. And on Monday morning, I was finally going to learn why my husband had believed I might one day need protection from my own son. What Robert had protected. I arrived at Richard Coleman's office at 9:47 Monday morning, 13 minutes early. Robert used to tease me about that. If an appointment is at 10, Evelyn arriving at 9:45 doesn't make you responsible. It makes you suspicious of clocks. I would always tell him that being early was better than being late. He would kiss my forehead and say, "That's why I married you. Somebody had to get me places on time." Sitting in my car outside Richard's office, I would have given anything to hear him say it again. The drive home from Charlottesville on Sunday had felt different from the drive there. When I left Richmond, I had been hurt. When I came back, I had questions. I had resisted calling Daniel. He called me once Saturday afternoon. I let it ring twice before answering. "How was the rest of your trip?" he asked. "Interesting. Did you like Blue Ridge Haven?" "It was beautiful." He immediately asked, "What did you think of the units, not the restaurant, not Charlottesville, not whether I had enjoyed Thanksgiving, the units?" "I'm still thinking." Daniel sounded disappointed, but he recovered quickly. "No rush." I almost smiled. Everything about his behavior suggested there was in fact a rush. Still, I said nothing about Sophie's messages, nothing about Richard, nothing about the trust. For once I allowed Daniel to believe I knew less than I did. At exactly 10, Richard's receptionist led me into his office. Richard was standing beside a conference table. 3 folders were arranged in front of him. One was thick and blue. Martinez Family Trust was printed across the tab. Seeing my last name on legal documents made everything feel suddenly real. Richard hugged me. "You look tired." "I didn't sleep much. I'm not surprised." He pulled out a chair. "Coffee, no." "That's serious." I smiled faintly. Richard sat across from me. "I reviewed everything yesterday. And first I want to make one thing absolutely clear." He rested both hands on the table. "Daniel cannot sell your house." I exhaled. "He cannot mortgage it. He cannot transfer it. He cannot list it without your authorization. He cannot compel you to move." "What about Rebecca?" "Same answer." I nodded. "Good. Now we need to talk about why." Richard opened the blue folder. "Right, and you created the Martinez Family Trust 11 years ago. I remember. You transferred the Richmond property into it several years later." "Yes. At Robert's death, you became the sole controlling trustee." I frowned. I knew I was trustee. I'm not sure I ever understood everything that meant. That's common. Most people don't spend their mornings reading trust agreements for entertainment. Despite everything, I laughed. Richard turned several pages. "In practical terms, it means you control the property, completely subject to the terms of the trust, yes. And those terms give you broad authority." He began counting them on his fingers. "You may remain in the Richmond house for the rest of your life." I nodded. You may sell it. Another finger. You may purchase another residence. Another. You may invest the proceeds. Another. You may use trust assets for your health support, maintenance, comfort, travel, and general welfare. I raised an eyebrow. Travel. Robert was very specific. That sounded like him. Richard continued. You may also make certain changes to beneficiary allocations. That caught my attention. What changes will get there? He turned the folder toward me. Daniel is currently named as a remainder beneficiary, meaning he gets the house when I die. Not exactly. I frowned. I thought that was exactly what it meant. It means he may eventually receive assets remaining in the trust according to the distribution provisions then in effect. That sounds like lawyer language designed to avoid saying yes. It is lawyer language designed to avoid saying something inaccurate. I sat back. So Daniel doesn't own any part of my house. No. Not even technically. Not even technically. He can't borrow against what he might inherit, not against the trust property itself. He can't promise the house to someone, no. He can't use it as collateral, absolutely not. Something inside me relaxed. Then something else tightened. Does Daniel know that? Richard leaned back. He should. Should Robert explain the general structure to him years ago? General structure, yes. Did Robert explain that Daniel doesn't control anything while I'm alive? Yes. I stared at him. That changed something. Until then, part of me had wondered whether Daniel genuinely misunderstood. Maybe he thought being my only child gave him some legal interest in the house. But Robert had explained it. So why would he be discussing the sale? That, Richard said, is what concerns me. He opened another folder. Do you remember Daniel's business problem about 8 years ago? I did. Daniel had been 34. He and a college friend had invested in a small specialty construction company. At first, everything looked promising. Then one partner disappeared with money, contracts collapsed, and Daniel found himself facing debt. Robert stepped in. I remembered the arguments. I remembered Daniel sitting at our kitchen table with his face in his hands. I remembered Rebecca crying. And I remembered Robert eventually writing a check. How much did we give him? I asked. Richard corrected me gently. Robert gave him $85,000. I stared. I thought it was 50. He told you 50. I remember 50. Richard's expression told me enough. Robert covered additional obligations privately. A familiar irritation rose inside me. Why didn't he tell me? I asked him the same thing. And he said you would have agreed because Daniel was your son, but he didn't want you carrying the worry. That sounds exactly like Robert. It does. I looked toward the window. So he rescued him. Yes. And then Daniel recovered financially. The company closed. He returned to sales. I know that part. What you don't know is that Robert came to see me about 6 months later. I turned back. Without me? Yes. That stung. But Richard continued before I could react. He wasn't trying to hide assets from you. He wanted advice about changing the estate plan, and nothing became effective until you signed the later amendments. I signed them. You did. Then why don't I remember this? Because the provisions were technical, and at the time the primary discussion was about protecting you after Robert's death. I rubbed my forehead. Robert handled most of our long-term financial planning. I attended meetings. I signed documents. I asked questions. But I trusted him completely. Perhaps too completely. What worried him? Richard folded his hands. He said something I wrote down afterward because I thought it was important. Richard opened a legal pad from the folder. He said Daniel is a good man when he feels secure. When he's afraid, he starts counting things that don't belong to him yet. I felt the air leave my lungs. Richard watched me carefully. Robert loved Daniel. I know. He wasn't trying to punish him. I know. But after the business failure, Robert realized something. What Daniel had talked about, the money you and Robert would eventually leave him, as though it were part of his own financial future. I remembered something then. A dinner. Years earlier. Daniel had been talking about rebuilding after the failed company. He said almost jokingly, "At least I'll never have to worry about retirement. You two did everything right." Robert had gone quiet. At the time I thought he was tired. Now the memory felt different. What did Robert change? Richard pulled the blue folder closer. He strengthened your control. How originally, after Robert's death, the trust was more rigid about ultimate distributions. I waited. The amendment gave you significantly broader authority to redirect assets among beneficiaries and charitable purposes. My eyes widened. You mean I can change what Daniel inherits? Yes. How much? A substantial amount. All of it. Richard paused. There are provisions we'd need to review carefully, but you have far more discretion than Daniel may realize. I stared at the trust. Suddenly Daniel's sentence from the old email returned. If Mom likes it, everything gets easier. If I moved, if I sold, if hundreds of thousands of dollars became liquid. Did Daniel believe that money was eventually his no matter what? Richard continued. There's something else. He reached into the folder and removed a cream-colored envelope. My name was written across the front. Evelyn. I knew the handwriting immediately. Robert. My throat tightened. What is that, a letter? I couldn't take my eyes off it. When did he write it? Shortly after the trust amendment. That was years ago, yes. Why have I never seen it? Because Robert gave me specific instructions. Richard placed the envelope between us. He told me not to give this to you merely because he died. My eyes filled. What was I supposed to wait for? Richard's voice softened. He said I should give it to you only if Daniel ever pressured you regarding the house, your money, or an inheritance he believed was already his. I stared at my husband's handwriting. For a moment, Daniel disappeared from my thoughts. So did Thanksgiving. All I could see was Robert sitting somewhere years earlier writing my name on that envelope. He had known there was a possibility he wouldn't be there when I needed the warning. You knew about this the whole time, I whispered. Yes. And you never said anything. I promised Robert. I touched the envelope but didn't open it. What did he think Daniel would do? I don't know exactly what Robert wrote. You never read it, no. I looked up. Then why did he leave it with you? Because he wanted someone outside the family to recognize the moment when you needed it. My fingers trembled slightly. I lifted the envelope. It felt almost weightless, yet nothing I had held since Robert's funeral had felt heavier. Richard closed the trust folder. Evelyn, whatever is in that letter, remember one thing. What? Robert didn't create these protections because he wanted you to fear your son. I looked at him. He created them because he wanted you to remain free to say no to him. I lowered my eyes to the envelope. For 2 years I had believed Robert's final gifts to me were memories, a paid-off home, and enough financial security to live without fear. Now I understood there had been another gift waiting. A warning. One he had written years before Daniel told me there was no room at Thanksgiving. I slipped my finger beneath the edge of the envelope. And as the paper began to open, one question frightened me more than anything Daniel had done so far. What had my husband understood about our son that I had refused to see Robert's warning? For several seconds I couldn't pull the letter from the envelope. My fingers simply rested against the paper. Robert's handwriting on the front had already brought back more of him than I was prepared for. The slight slant of the letters. The way he always made the bottom of his capital E too long. 39 years of marriage teaches you strange details about another human being. I knew how Robert cleared his throat when he was about to disagree with someone politely. I knew he always left exactly 1 sip of coffee in his cup. I knew he couldn't sleep if a closet door was open. And I knew his handwriting. Seeing it again made the 2 years since his death disappear for one painful moment. Richard remained quiet across the table. Finally, I unfolded the letter. Evelyn. If Richard is giving you this, then something I hoped would never happen probably has. I stopped. My vision blurred immediately. I took a breath and continued. If Daniel has begun pressuring you about the house, the trust or money he expects to receive someday, please read everything before you decide what to do. Our son is not a bad man. That sentence mattered. Even from the grave, Robert wasn't condemning him. He was warning me without asking me to stop loving my child. Daniel has always loved his family. He works hard. He wants to provide. He also has one weakness I fear we helped create. When Daniel becomes frightened about money, he starts treating family security as if it belongs to everyone. I lowered the letter. That sounds like him, I whispered. Richard said nothing. I kept reading. You remember the business failure. I know you believe we helped him with $50,000. The real amount was $85,000. I closed my eyes. Richard had already told me, but seeing Robert admit it made the secrecy hurt differently. I should have told you. That was my mistake. I convinced myself I was protecting you from worry. Maybe I was also protecting myself from having to admit how serious the situation had become. Daniel was terrified. He had creditors calling. He believed he had failed Rebecca. He believed he had failed us. I could not stand watching him suffer, so I rescued him. For a while I felt proud that I could. Then I realized I may have taught him the wrong lesson. I swallowed. There are two lessons a parent can teach when an adult child falls. One is you are loved even when you fail. The other is you will never have to pay the full price of your choices because someone in this family will always catch you. I intended to teach the first. I fear Daniel learned the second. I lowered the page again. My hands were shaking. I remembered the night Robert gave Daniel the money. Daniel had hugged his father in our kitchen. He cried. I cried. Rebecca cried. Robert had stood there holding our son with one hand against the back of his head. At the time, I thought I was watching a family save one of its own. Maybe I had been. But perhaps rescue had a cost none of us understood yet. I returned to the letter. Months later, Daniel made a comment about our house and investments. He said that at least his long-term future was secure because one day it all comes down to me anyway. He laughed when he said it. I did not. My heart stopped. I remembered that conversation. Not perfectly, but enough. A Sunday dinner. Daniel talking about retirement. Robert becoming unusually quiet. I had forgotten the exact words because I hadn't considered them important. Robert had. That was when I changed the trust. Not to punish Daniel, not to take anything away from him. I changed it because inheritance should remain a gift until the day it is given. It should never become permission to plan someone else's life. I read that sentence twice. Inheritance should remain a gift until the day it is given. I could almost hear Robert saying it. If Daniel ever begins counting your house, your savings, or your security as part of his financial plan, please remember this. What we built belongs to you while you are here. Your home is not Daniel's future asset. Your savings are not his emergency reserve. And your love for him does not create a debt you must repay. Tears fell onto the paper. I wiped them quickly, afraid of damaging the ink. Then I reached the final paragraph. Evelyn, you have spent your life taking care of people. That is one of the reasons I loved you. But there is a difference between helping someone stand and allowing them to lean so heavily that you fall. And allowing them to lean so heavily that you fall. If I am not there to tell you this myself, then let this letter do it for me. Never let love turn your security into someone else's emergency fund. I love you. Robert. I folded forward over the letter. The grief came so suddenly I couldn't stop it. For 2 years I had learned how to miss Robert in manageable pieces. I missed him when something broke. I missed him when I saw a restaurant he would have liked. I missed him at night when I reached toward his side of the bed without thinking. But this was different. This felt like losing him again and hearing him at the same time. Richard quietly pushed a box of tissues toward me. I took one. He knew I said. Richard nodded. He worried. I didn't. You trusted your son. So did Robert. Yes. I looked at the letter. That's what makes this so awful. Robert wasn't saying Daniel was bad. No. He was saying Daniel gets scared. Yes. I leaned back. And suddenly the pieces began arranging themselves. Daniel asking about maintenance. Rebecca asking about property values. The equity. Blue Ridge Haven. Unit 214. Bridge financing. The email. If Mom likes it, everything gets easier. Thanksgiving. No room. The conversation after dinner. $780,000. It's happening again, I whispered. Richard watched me. What is whatever happened 8 years ago? We don't know that yet. Daniel needs money. We suspect financial pressure. No. I shook my head. He needs money. I could feel it now. Daniel wasn't fascinated by retirement communities. Rebecca wasn't suddenly concerned about whether I had too much yard to maintain. Something had frightened them. And just as Robert predicted, Daniel had begun looking toward family security, toward mine. I turned to Richard. Can you find out whether Daniel is in financial trouble within limits? What limits? I'm not going to invade his privacy access accounts or do anything improper. Of course. But business ownership, property records, liens, certain court filings, and some financing activity can leave public traces. What about Rebecca? Same rules. I thought about Rebecca saying my downsizing would free everyone up. Check what you legally can. Richard nodded. I already started. That surprised me. When? Yesterday. And I found enough to believe we should continue. My stomach tightened. What did you find? Daniel and Rebecca are connected to an investment property through an LLC. I didn't know that. It appears they invested a few years ago. Is it failing? I don't know yet. What else? Richard hesitated. There are indications they may be pursuing another property. I stared at him. Another investment. It appears so. While the first one may be in trouble, that's what I'm trying to understand. I looked down at Robert's letter. Suddenly, Daniel's urgency made more sense. If he and Rebecca were trying to finance another deal, perhaps they needed liquidity. But why mine? I haven't promised him money. I know. I haven't even discussed selling. I know. Then how could my house help them? Richard leaned forward. That's the question. I folded Robert's letter carefully and returned it to the envelope. Find out. I will. And Richard. Yes, I don't want Daniel destroyed. His expression softened. I never thought you did. I'm angry, but I don't want revenge. Then don't make decisions while you're angry. I nodded. I want the truth. That's what we'll get. I placed the envelope in my purse. Before leaving, I asked Richard to make me another copy of the relevant trust provisions. He did. For the first time in years, I intended to read every page myself. When I arrived home, the house felt different. Nothing had changed physically. The same photographs, the same furniture, the same walnut dining table. But I no longer saw the house only as a collection of memories. I saw what Daniel and Rebecca might see. Equity. Approximately $780,000 worth of property. A mortgagee-free asset. Something that could become cash. I hated thinking that way. Then I remembered Robert's words. Your home is not Daniel's future asset. I walked into the dining room and placed my hand on the back of Robert's chair. For years, I had thought protecting my family meant being willing to sacrifice for them. Robert's letter asked a harder question. What if protecting your family sometimes meant refusing to rescue them? My phone buzzed. Daniel. I looked at his name. I didn't answer. A minute later, he sent a message. Mom, can we talk sometime this week? Rebecca and I have something we want to run by you. Could be good for everyone. I stared at those words. Good for everyone. Then I looked at Robert's letter. Everything gets easier. Free everyone up. Different phrases. Same direction. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of what Daniel was going to ask. I was afraid of how long he had already been planning to ask it. And somewhere beneath that fear was something stronger. Robert had spent years preparing me for a moment he hoped would never come. Now that it had, I intended to listen. The real reason for Thanksgiving. Richard called me Wednesday morning. I was standing in the grocery store trying to decide whether I needed milk when his name appeared on my phone. For 2 days I had been waiting for that call. I abandoned my cart beside the cereal aisle and walked outside. What did you find? Good morning to you too, Evelyn. Richard. I know. His voice changed. Are you somewhere private? Give me a minute. I walked to my car and locked the doors, although I wasn't sure why. All right. Richard took a breath. I want to be careful about this. Some of what I found is public record. Some comes from documents connected to the investment property. And some pieces are still assumptions. Understood. Daniel and Rebecca formed an LLC with another couple approximately 3 years ago. What for? They purchased a small commercial property outside Richmond. I vaguely remembered Daniel mentioning something about a business investment. At the time, Robert had been ill and I had little attention for anything else. Was it successful? Apparently not. how bad the property is still operating, but there are indications the investment has been underperforming. What kind of indications? Refinancing activity. Delayed tax payments that were later resolved. A contractor lien that was eventually released. My stomach tightened. Daniel never told me. That doesn't necessarily mean anything improper. Adults don't always tell their parents every financial difficulty, I know. But it establishes pressure. There was Robert's word again. Pressure. What else? Daniel and Rebecca are now involved in negotiations for another investment property. I stared through my windshield. They're buying another one. They're trying to. Why would they do that if the first one is struggling? Because people sometimes believe the next investment will solve the previous investment. Robert would have said exactly the same thing. How much I don't have the full purchase price confirmed, but it appears substantial. Substantial meaning over $1 million. I closed my eyes. Daniel earned a good salary. Rebecca did well in real estate, but they were not people who could casually purchase million-dollar investments. How are they financing it? That's where this becomes relevant to you. I opened my eyes. Richard continued. They appear to be having difficulty with financing. Why debt-to-income concerns? Existing obligations. The performance of their current investment. And my house fixes that. Not directly. That distinction confused me. What does that mean? It means they cannot use your house as collateral. They cannot represent it as their asset. Your trust prevents that, and even without the trust, they don't own it. Then why have they spent 6 months trying to convince me to sell? Richard paused. Because your house doesn't need to belong to Daniel for your money to help him. I understood immediately. The proceeds, yes. If I sold for roughly $780,000, even after fees and moving costs, I would have hundreds of thousands of dollars in liquid assets. Money that could be transferred, loaned, invested, used. Has Daniel told anyone I agreed to give him money? I have no evidence of that. What about Rebecca? No evidence of a specific promise. Then what did they say? There is a reference connected to preliminary financing discussions indicating expected family liquidity. I repeated the phrase slowly. Expected family liquidity. Yes. What does that mean? Technically very little unless documented. And practically it suggests they were telling someone their broader financial position might improve because money could become available within the family. I felt heat rising into my face. My money. Possibly. No. Richard. My money. He didn't argue. I looked at the grocery store entrance. People walked past carrying bags, living perfectly ordinary Wednesday mornings, while I sat in my car discovering my son had apparently incorporated my future into a financial strategy I knew nothing about. Could a lender actually approve them based on money I haven't promised, not legitimately as their asset? A lender would require documentation for any gift loan guarantee or contribution, so they still need me. Yes. That was why Daniel hadn't asked yet. He had been preparing the ground. First convince me the house was too large, then show me Blue Ridge Haven, then make moving sound practical, then selling becomes logical. Once the house sells, the equity becomes cash, and only then does the real request appear. I thought of the email. If Mom likes it, everything gets easier. I finally understood. Blue Ridge Haven was not the end of Daniel's plan. It was the first domino. What happened at Thanksgiving? I asked. Richard was quiet. What do you mean? Why were Rebecca's parents there for a money meeting? I can't know what was said inside Daniel's house. I know. But based on what you told me, I suspect they were discussing how to structure the investment and where additional capital might come from. I remembered Sophie's messages. Grandma Parker asked what your house was worth. Mom said maybe $780. If you downsized, it would free everyone up. I suddenly saw the dinner from a different angle. Rebecca's parents, papers, the children sent downstairs, my house discussed after dessert, and me 2 hours away exactly where Daniel wanted me. A realization struck so sharply that I said it aloud. There was room. What at Thanksgiving? My voice shook. There was room for me. Evelyn. No. Listen. I sat straighter. Rebecca's parents were staying at a hotel. The guest room was empty. The office had a sofa bed, They could have put me anywhere. Richard said nothing. They didn't need me gone because of sleeping arrangements. I could hear my own heartbeat. They needed me gone because of that conversation. The truth was uglier than being excluded. Daniel hadn't simply preferred Rebecca's family over me. He had removed me from a meeting about my own future. Because if I had been sitting at that table when Rebecca said my house was worth $780,000, I could have said I'm not selling. If someone mentioned expected family liquidity, I could have said, there is no family liquidity. If Daniel suggested I would move soon, I could have said, who told you that? My absence had allowed assumption to masquerade as agreement. I whispered. There was room at the table. There just wasn't room for my answer. Richard let the silence sit. Then he said, that may be the most important thing you've understood so far. I leaned my head against the seat. What do I do? Nothing yet. I'm tired of doing nothing. You aren't doing nothing. You're learning. I want to call him. I know. I want him to explain why he thought he had the right. And he will. When he asks you for what he needs. I frowned. You think I should wait? I think Daniel believes you're considering Blue Ridge Haven. He does. He believes you may sell. Yes. And he doesn't know you've spoken to me. No. Then let him explain his own plan. I understood. If I confronted Daniel with everything we had discovered, he could retreat. He could claim misunderstanding. He could say Rebecca had gotten ahead of herself. But if I waited, Daniel would eventually have to tell me what he wanted. What if he doesn't ask? Richard gave a humorless laugh. Based on the urgency I'm seeing, I suspect he will. He was right. That evening, Daniel called. I was sitting at my dining table reading Robert's letter again. Hey, Mom. Hello, Daniel. Bad time number. Rebecca and I were talking. Of course they were, he continued. I wanted to see if you'd thought any more about Charlottesville. A little. And I told you. Blue Ridge Haven was beautiful. That's great. Again, that unmistakable relief. Unit 214 was nice, wasn't it? I froze. I had never told Daniel which unit Allison showed me. He already knew. Yes, I said carefully. Very nice. I knew you'd like it. How what? How did you know I'd like that particular unit? A pause. I looked at the floor plan. I see. He moved on quickly. You know Mom, Richmond's market is still strong. Rebecca thinks if you ever wanted to sell now could be a really good window. There it was. I looked at Robert's handwriting. Your home is not Daniel's future asset. I'm not sure I want to sell. Of course. His tone remained gentle. No pressure. I nearly smiled. Then Daniel said, but there's something else Rebecca and I wanted to talk to you about. My hand tightened around the letter. What? It's not a big deal. People rarely said that before small things. We've got an opportunity. I waited. A property investment. A really good one. My heart began beating harder. Daniel continued explaining return's location timing and how unusual the opportunity was. I barely listened. Richard had already told me enough. Finally, Daniel said, there's just a temporary financing gap. There it was. How temporary, very. And what does that have to do with me? Silence. Then my son laughed softly. Well, potentially nothing. Potentially. But if you did decide to sell the house. He stopped. For the first time, I wasn't hearing concern from my son. I was hearing the opening move of a request that had been months in the making. Daniel still believed he was guiding the conversation. He still believed I knew nothing about the LLC, the financing pressure, the Thanksgiving meeting, or Robert's warning. So I let him continue. And when he finally began explaining how selling my home could create an opportunity for the whole family, I understood something that hurt more than any lie he had told me. Daniel had not begun planning what to do with my money after I agreed to sell. He had begun planning before he ever asked me. My son finally asked. Daniel stopped talking for a moment as if he were waiting for me to help him finish the sentence. I didn't. There are silences we rush to fill because we love someone. That had been one of my habits as a mother. Whenever Daniel struggled to ask for something, I made it easier. When he was 12 and wanted to quit baseball, I gave him the words. When he was 19 and needed money after overspending at college, I asked how much before he had to say it. When his business failed, Robert and I stepped forward before Daniel fully understood what failure was going to cost him. Perhaps Robert had been right. Sometimes love makes things too easy. So that Wednesday evening, sitting at the same walnut table where I had spent decades feeding my son, I let him struggle. Finally, Daniel cleared his throat. Like I said, potentially it has nothing to do with you. But, well, if you were already considering downsizing, there could be a way for everybody to benefit. Everybody. I looked at Robert's letter beside my hand. How Daniel's voice became more confident. Rebecca has been tracking the Richmond market. Your neighborhood is still incredibly strong. You've mentioned that. If you listed early next year, she thinks you could get somewhere between 750 and 800. Interesting. The number matched the Thanksgiving conversation almost perfectly. And where would I live, Blue Ridge Haven, if you decide you like it? I did like it. That's what I mean. You'd have a beautiful place, no yard maintenance, no major repairs. You'd have people around. And what happens to the difference? A pause. What difference? Daniel Unit 214 doesn't cost what my house is worth. No, of course not. So if I sold my home and bought that condo, I would still have a considerable amount of money. Well, yes. And apparently that matters. He hesitated. I wouldn't put it that way. How would you put it? I'd say it gives you flexibility. For what? For whatever you want. I almost admired how carefully he was walking toward the real subject, such as another pause. Well, this investment Rebecca and I are looking at, there it was again. Tell me about it. Daniel immediately sounded relieved. He launched into details. The property was part of a small commercial development outside Richmond. The location was growing. A major road improvement had been approved nearby. One tenant was already interested. Rebecca believed the property could appreciate significantly within 5 years. Daniel used words like opportunity leverage positioning and long-term value. I had heard Robert use some of those words, but Robert always followed them with risk. Daniel barely mentioned risk at all. What happened to the other property? I asked. Silence. What other property? The one you and Rebecca already own through the LLC. For the first time that evening, Daniel had no prepared answer. How do you know about that? So there is another property. Mom, that's not relevant. It seems relevant if you're asking me to become involved in another investment. I haven't asked you anything yet. Then keep talking. His breathing changed. I could hear irritation entering his voice. The first property had some issues. What kind? Normal commercial real estate issues. Is it making money? That's complicated. Is that another way of saying no, no? It means commercial investments take time. And you want another one. This new deal is completely different. Is that what you told your lender? A long silence. I knew immediately I had gone too far. Daniel's voice became guarded. Who have you been talking to? I asked a question. You don't just randomly know about lenders and LLCs. Maybe I finally started asking questions about why my son has been so interested in my house. Mom. His tone hardened. You're making this sound sinister. Then explain it in a way that doesn't. He sighed loudly. I'm trying to build something for my family. I'm your family. That's exactly my point. No, Daniel. I don't think it is. I stood and walked toward the kitchen window. Outside my backyard was dark. Robert's old shed stood near the fence. Everything I could see had been built slowly, paid for slowly, maintained slowly. There had been no miracle investment, no shortcut, just work. Daniel spoke again. We have a financing gap. How much? It depends. How much? Another hesitation. 250,000. Even though Richard had prepared me for a request, hearing the number made my stomach turn. $250,000. It wouldn't be a gift. I didn't ask what you called it. It would be a loan. From me. Yes. And where would I get $250,000? Daniel didn't answer. I did it for him. By selling my house. Only if you were already planning to sell. But I wasn't. You've been talking about Blue Ridge Haven. No, Daniel. You've been talking about Blue Ridge Haven. That's not fair, isn't it? You liked the place. I did. Then what's the problem? The question stunned me. The problem is that liking a condominium does not mean I want to sell the home where I've lived for 32 years. Nobody said you had to. Then your financing gap has nothing to do with my house. It doesn't have to. Good. Silence. Then Daniel said, "You're being unnecessarily difficult." I closed my eyes. There it was. Not concerned, not confused, frustrated, because I wasn't following the plan. I sat down again. Daniel, when did you first contact Blue Ridge Haven? Silence. Mom. When? A while ago. Before you told me about it, I was researching. For me, yes. Did I ask you to? No, but did you ask about Unit 214? He stopped. Did you ask about the deposit, Mom? Bridge financing. How do you know that? Did you ask whether my purchase there could depend on selling this house? He said nothing. My throat tightened. I had spent days preparing for this conversation, but preparation didn't remove pain. It only kept pain from controlling what came next. Daniel, was Thanksgiving part of this? What you heard me. That's ridiculous. Was there really no room for me? There were a lot of people. Your in-laws stayed at a hotel. How do you know that? Sophie told me. He exhaled sharply. She needs to stop involving herself in adult conversations. She didn't involve herself. She called her grandmother on Thanksgiving. This is exactly why kids shouldn't repeat things they don't understand. She understood there was an empty guest room. Daniel went silent. I continued. She also understood you told her I wanted a quiet weekend. Mom, did I? You went to Charlottesville. After you told me there was no room, you were happy to go. That is not the same thing. He didn't answer. I felt my eyes burn. Then I asked the question I had been carrying since Thanksgiving night. Was that why there was no room for me? What are you talking about? The meeting. Silence. The conversation about my house after dinner. His breathing stopped for a second. Sophie told you that? Yes. She had no business. Stop blaming Sophie. My voice rose for the first time. She did not create this situation. Daniel went quiet. I lowered my voice. Were you planning to discuss my house with Rebecca's parents? It wasn't like that. What was it like? We were talking about the investment. And my house. Only as a possibility. A possibility I hadn't agreed to. Nobody said you had. Then why was Rebecca telling people what my house was worth? Because she's a realtor. Why was she saying my downsizing would free everyone up? Another silence. I almost wished he would lie. Instead, Daniel said quietly, we were exploring options, without me. The words formed in my mind before I said them. You were exploring my options without me. No. Our options. That one word told me everything. Our. My home had become our option. My equity had become our flexibility. My future had become our plan. I gripped the edge of the table. So tell me plainly, if I sold this house, what exactly were you hoping I would do? Daniel was silent for so long that I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, loan us the $250,000. Finally. No euphemism, no family opportunity, no flexibility, just the truth. And if I say no, I'd be disappointed. Would Rebecca? That's not fair. Would she? Yes. I looked at Robert's letter. What about her parents? They're considering helping too. So Thanksgiving was a fundraising meeting. That's insulting. What would you call it? A family discussion. A family discussion I was deliberately excluded from. Daniel's voice sharpened. Because we knew you'd react exactly like this. I went completely still. There are moments when someone accidentally tells you more truth than they intended. Daniel had just given me one. You knew I would object. That's not what I meant. Yes, it is. No, Mom. You knew I might say no, so it was easier to discuss my money when I wasn't sitting at the table. It wasn't your money yet. The words came quickly, then silence. My heart seemed to stop. What did you just say? Daniel didn't answer. Daniel. I worded that badly. Then word it correctly. He exhaled. I mean, the house hasn't been sold. There aren't proceeds yet. But I knew that wasn't what he had meant. And somewhere inside the sentence he was trying to take back was the belief Robert had warned me about 8 years earlier. Money that wasn't his, a house that wasn't his, A future inheritance Daniel had already started counting. I looked at Robert's handwriting. Never let love turn your security into someone else's emergency fund. Daniel, I said quietly, I think we need to have the rest of this conversation in person. With Rebecca, yes. When I'll arrange it. Mom, we don't need lawyers involved. I hadn't mentioned a lawyer. That interested me. I didn't say anything about a lawyer. Silence. Then Daniel said, I just don't want this becoming bigger than it needs to be. I looked around the dining room Robert and I had built our family around. It became bigger the moment you decided my absence made Thanksgiving easier. Mom, I'll call you. I ended the call. For several minutes I sat without moving. Daniel had finally asked, $250,000. But the number wasn't what frightened me most. What frightened me was how natural the request seemed to him. As though selling my home was merely the first step toward releasing money that had been waiting for his use. And I knew the next conversation would force Daniel to say aloud what Robert had predicted years ago. That somewhere along the way, my son had stopped seeing my house as mine. He had begun seeing it as his inheritance. It would be mine someday. Anyway, Daniel called again the next morning. I was making coffee when the phone rang. His name appeared on the screen and for several seconds I simply watched it. 24 hours earlier I would have answered immediately. That was another habit motherhood had given me. When your child calls, you answer, even when the child is 42 years old, even when he has a wife, children, a career, a mortgage, and enough gray hair at his temples to remind you that he stopped being a boy decades ago. Some part of you still hears the baby crying. But that morning, I let the phone ring 4 times. Then I answered. Good morning, Daniel. Mom. His voice sounded tired. Did I wake you? No. Can we talk? We are talking. He sighed. I mean, really talk. Last night got out of hand. I poured coffee into my mug. Did it? Yes. Which part? You know which part. I'd like to hear you say it. Silence. Then he said, the money. Interesting. Not Thanksgiving. Not the lie. Not discussing my house without me. The money. I'm listening. Daniel took a breath. I think you misunderstood what Rebecca and I are trying to do. Then explain it. We're trying to build long-term security. For whom? For our family. Again. Our family. I carried my coffee to the dining room and sat at the walnut table. Robert's letter was still inside the drawer beside me. Daniel, you already have a home. I know. You have retirement accounts. Yes. You have jobs. Yes. You have an investment property. That property is exactly why this opportunity matters. How, if we can acquire the new property, it diversifies everything. I almost smiled. Robert had loved financial vocabulary because he believed precise words helped people understand risk. Daniel seemed to use precise words to make risk sound respectable. Does it solve the problems with the first property? It strengthens our position. That wasn't my question. Mom, you're not an investment analyst. No, I'm just the person you want $250,000 from. Silence. That's unfair. I'm beginning to notice you use that word whenever I ask a question you don't like. His voice hardened. I'm trying to talk to you like an adult. Then do that. I am. No. You're trying to sell me something. I'm trying to help you see the bigger picture. I looked around my dining room. The bigger picture. I wondered whether Daniel understood how strange it felt to hear my son explain the bigger picture of assets I had spent decades building. Let's simplify it, I said. Do you think I should move to Blue Ridge Haven? Yes. Why? Because it makes sense. For me, yes. Only for me. Daniel hesitated. That's a strange question. It's a simple one. Obviously, if selling the house creates flexibility for everyone, that's an added benefit. There it was. He was getting closer. What if I stay here? Another pause. You can. And if I never sell, of course you can do that. But, no but. I waited. Daniel had never handled silence well. Eventually he continued, I just don't understand why you would. Because this is my home. It's a house, Mom. The sentence stung. No. To you it's a house. That's what I mean. You're attaching emotion to a financial decision. I almost laughed. Daniel, I raised you here. I know. Your father and I spent 32 years here. I know. He died here. I know that too. Then perhaps emotion belongs in the decision. I'm not saying it doesn't. I'm saying emotion shouldn't prevent you from doing what makes practical sense. And you've decided what makes practical sense. I've researched it. Without me. The thought sat between us. I asked, why did you contact Blue Ridge Haven before asking whether I wanted to move? I was gathering information. Why Unit 2 Fort Fawn? It looked like a good fit. Why ask about bridge financing? Because if you liked it, I didn't want you losing the unit while waiting for the Richmond house to sell. I never said I was selling. Mom, this is exactly what I'm talking about. His frustration was rising now. You're acting like I was plotting against you. Were you? No. Then why was I excluded from Thanksgiving? We've been through this. No. You've given me explanations. That isn't the same thing. Daniel went quiet. I continued. You told me there was no room. There was an empty bedroom. Plans changed. Your in-laws had hotel reservations before you called me. Silence. You told Sophie I wanted a quiet weekend. I didn't want the kids upset. You discussed the value of my house after dinner. We discussed the investment. You discussed both, because they're connected. The moment he said it, we both heard the truth. I lowered my voice. Exactly. Daniel exhaled. Fine. Yes, they're connected. Finally. If you sold the house and moved somewhere smaller, you would still have plenty of money. My money. I know. Do you? Of course I do. Then why did you plan around it before asking me? I didn't plan around it. You contacted Blue Ridge Haven to help you. You researched selling my home. Rebecca is a realtor. You discussed my equity with her parents. Because we were talking about possible sources of capital. I went still. Say that again. Mom, possible sources of capital. I didn't mean you were a source of capital. That is exactly what you meant. No, I meant the loan. A loan I didn't know existed. Daniel's voice rose. And I'm asking now, after months of planning, because I wanted to have something concrete before bothering you. Bothering me, yes. You were discussing selling my house behind my back to avoid bothering me. That's not what I said. I felt strangely calm. Perhaps there comes a point in every argument when pain burns itself out and leaves only clarity. Daniel, if I loan you $250,000 and the investment fails, what happens? It won't. That's not an answer. We'd repay you. With what? Our income? You already have debt. We manage our debt. Richard found liens connected to your existing property. Silence. This time it was different. How much have you told Richard? Enough. You had no right to investigate me. I almost couldn't believe what I heard. I had no right, you know what I mean. No, Daniel, I don't. This is my financial business, and my house is whose business? He didn't answer. Daniel, yours. Good. I let the word settle. Then stop building your financial future around it. He snapped. I am not building my future around your house. You're asking me to sell it and give you $250,000 as a loan. That distinction doesn't change where the money comes from. You'd still have hundreds of thousands left. I stared at the table. There it was. The calculation. He had done the math. My house was worth approximately $780,000. Subtract the cost of Blue Ridge Haven, subtract fees, subtract his $250,000. And apparently, if I still had enough left to survive comfortably, Daniel believed the arrangement was reasonable. You've calculated what I would have left, obviously. Why? Because I wanted to make sure you'd be secure. That's very thoughtful. He missed the sarcasm. Exactly. This doesn't hurt you. Daniel, losing $250,000 can hurt anyone. You wouldn't lose it. You cannot guarantee that. I'm your son. That isn't collateral. He went silent. Then he said something I had never heard in his voice before. Not anger, resentment. Do you know how frustrating this is? I almost whispered. For you, yes, for me. Tell me. You're sitting in a paid-off house worth almost $800,000. My house. I know you keep saying that, but you don't sound like you know. He continued as if I hadn't spoken. You have savings. Dad left you secure. You don't have debt. You don't have kids to put through college anymore. You don't have the financial pressure Rebecca and I have. And therefore I'm not saying therefore anything. Yes, you are. No, I'm saying you could help without changing your lifestyle. By selling my home. You keep making it sound like we're putting you on the street. I never said that. Blue Ridge Haven is beautiful, I know. You liked it, I did. Then what are we arguing about? I finally understood why Daniel was so angry. From his perspective, the pieces fit perfectly. I would get a nice condo, he would get $250,000. Nobody would suffer. Therefore, my refusal felt irrational. Unless you remembered one inconvenient fact. The decision belonged to me. Daniel, I said, what happens if I decide to stay here for another 20 years? He laughed once. 20 years? Yes. You'd be 88. Women live to 88. I know. What if I spend my savings traveling, Mom? What if I sell this house someday and buy another one just as expensive? Why would you? What if I leave part of the estate to charity? Silence. There. For the first time, the argument stopped completely. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Daniel. That would be your choice. The words were correct. His tone wasn't. Yes, I said. It would. He sighed. I just don't understand why you're suddenly talking about giving away family assets. Family assets, you know what I mean. No. I want you to explain what you mean. Mom, please. Whose assets? Yours right now. Right now. 2 words. Tiny words. But I heard Robert's letter inside them. Inheritance should remain a gift until the day it is given. Right now, I repeated. Daniel realized his mistake. That came out wrong. Then tell me when they stop being mine. I didn't say that. When I'm 80, Mom. When I move, stop. When I die. His frustration finally broke. Yes. Silence filled the line. Then Daniel said the sentence Robert had feared years ago. The house is coming to me someday anyway. Neither of us spoke. My eyes moved toward the drawer containing Robert's letter. 8 years earlier, my husband had heard almost the same belief. One day it all comes down to me anyway. Robert had remembered. Robert had prepared. And now our son had said it again. Quietly, I replied, You just explained exactly why your father wrote the letter he did. Daniel's breathing changed. What letter? I didn't answer. Mom, what are you talking about? Your father understood something I didn't. What? That you had started counting things before they belonged to you. That's ridiculous. No. I felt tears in my eyes, but my voice remained steady. It's heartbreaking. Are you saying Dad wrote something about me? Yes. When? Years ago. What did he say? That conversation isn't happening over the phone. Mom. Friday. 10 o'clock. Richard Coleman's office. Why Richard? Because this is no longer a conversation about whether I like a condominium. Daniel was silent. Bring Rebecca. Are you threatening us? No. I looked at Robert's chair. I'm finally making sure everyone understands what belongs to whom. I ended the call before Daniel could answer. For several minutes I sat alone. I expected to feel victorious. I didn't. There is nothing satisfying about proving that someone you love has disappointed you. Daniel was still my son. I still remembered holding his hand on his first day of kindergarten. I still remembered Robert lifting him onto his shoulders. I still loved him. But love had allowed me to make excuses. Robert's love had done something wiser. It had prepared a boundary. And Friday morning, Daniel was going to learn that the inheritance he had already begun spending in his imagination was not his property. Not yet. And perhaps not ever in the way he assumed. The meeting. Daniel and Rebecca arrived at Richard Coleman's office carrying a folder. That was the first thing I noticed. Not Daniel's expression, not Rebecca's tight smile. The folder. It was thick dark blue and stuffed with papers. People do not accidentally arrive at a family conversation carrying a folder like that. They prepare it. I was already seated beside Richard when they entered the conference room at 10 Friday morning. Daniel stopped when he saw me. For half a second, he looked like the boy I remembered being called into the principal's office in 7th grade. Then the expression disappeared. Mom. Daniel. Rebecca looked at Richard. Good morning. Good morning, Rebecca. Nobody hugged. That alone told me how far we had traveled from Thanksgiving. Daniel and Rebecca sat across from me. The blue folder landed between them. Richard folded his hands. Evelyn asked me to attend because several issues involve her estate plan and the Martinez family trust. Rebecca glanced at Daniel. I thought we were discussing the property. We are, I said. Daniel leaned back. Mom, I still think involving attorneys makes this more dramatic than it needs to be. Richard answered before I could. I'm Evelyn's attorney. If a discussion involves a trust I administer documents for my presence is fairly ordinary. Daniel looked embarrassed. Rebecca stepped in. Nobody is trying to do anything inappropriate, good Richard said. Then this should be a simple conversation. I almost smiled. Rebecca opened the folder. We actually brought information because I think there's been a misunderstanding. She removed a document. I prepared a comparative market analysis for Evelyn's house. Of course she had. She slid it across the table. I looked down. Suggested listing range $769,000, $799,000. My address appeared at the top. Photographs of comparable homes followed. I looked at Rebecca. When did you prepare this a few weeks ago? Did I ask you to? No, but Daniel said you were considering downsizing. I told Daniel repeatedly that I wasn't ready to move. Rebecca's jaw tightened. He believed you were becoming more open to it, after he suggested I spend Thanksgiving touring a retirement community. Daniel shifted. Mom, we've already discussed that. No, we argued about it. Today we're discussing facts. Richard glanced at me. I knew he recognized Robert's influence in the word. Rebecca pulled another document from the folder. Blue Ridge Haven is not a nursing facility. I know. I toured it. Then you know it could actually be a very good lifestyle change. I never said it couldn't. Rebecca seemed confused. Then I don't understand the resistance. The resistance is to other people deciding I should move before I decide it. Daniel sighed. No one decided for you. I looked at the folder. What else is in there? Neither answered. Rebecca. She reluctantly removed several pages. Blue Ridge Haven, Unit 2 Fort Feene. Pricing. Estimated monthly fees. A rough timeline. My eyes moved down the page. December, January. Prepare Richmond property. January list. February, March. Target closing. I looked up. You made a schedule for selling my house. It was hypothetical. You put dates on it. That's what a hypothetical timeline looks like. I almost admired her confidence. Richard leaned forward. Did Evelyn authorize you to prepare the property for listing? No. Did she authorize photographs? Number, did she sign a listing agreement? No. Then we agree none of this represents Evelyn's decision. Rebecca folded her arms. Of course. Good. Daniel looked at me. See? Nobody was trying to force anything. I reached across and lifted the next document. There it was, a page titled Family Funding Scenario. Several amounts were listed. Rebecca's parents, Daniel and Rebecca, financing, and beside one line, EM, $250,000 private loan. My initials. I stared at them. Hypothetical too. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Yes. Before you asked me, we needed to know whether the numbers worked. I looked directly at him. So you built a financial plan that included $250,000 of my money before asking whether I would lend it. It was a scenario. Richard spoke calmly. Daniel, the terminology is not the issue. Daniel turned toward him. Then what is consent? The room became quiet. Richard continued. Your mother's concern is not that you calculated numbers. Her concern is that a series of decisions involving her residence and assets began being treated as likely outcomes without her agreement. Rebecca shook her head. That's not fair. I almost laughed. There was that word again. Richard remained composed. Which part is inaccurate? Rebecca didn't answer. I looked at Daniel. Tell Richard what you told me. What about the house? Daniel's face changed. Mom. The part where you explained why you thought all of this made sense. I was angry. So was I. I said things badly. You said the house was coming to you someday anyway. Rebecca looked at him. Apparently he hadn't told her that part. Richard remained expressionless. Did you say that, Daniel? Daniel looked at the table. Yes. Richard opened the blue trust folder beside him. Then this is probably the right time to clarify something. Daniel's shoulders tightened. Richard turned several pages. The Richmond property is held by the Martinez family trust. I know that. Do you understand your current legal interest in the property? Daniel frowned. I'm the beneficiary. A beneficiary. My parents created the trust for the family. Richard shook his head. That description is too broad. Daniel's expression hardened. What does that mean? It means your mother is the controlling trustee. I know. She has the authority to remain in the property. I know. To sell it. Yes. To purchase another residence with trust assets. Daniel nodded impatiently. And to manage proceeds according to the trust provisions without your approval. He paused. Okay. You cannot direct a sale. I never said I could. You cannot pledge the property. I know. You cannot borrow against it. I know. You cannot compel Evelyn to distribute proceeds. Daniel leaned back. Again, nobody is compelling anyone. Richard looked at him. And you do not currently own the inheritance you expect to receive. Silence. Daniel's eyes narrowed. What does that mean? It means future beneficiary status is not present ownership. I understand that. Do you? Daniel's face reddened. Yes. Richard slid a copy of the trust across the table. Then you understand why saying the house will be yours someday is legally and practically incomplete. Daniel glanced at me. I'm her only child. Richard nodded. You are. So nothing. Rebecca spoke. Surely Robert intended Daniel to inherit the estate. Richard turned toward her. Robert intended Evelyn to be protected first. The words landed heavily. Daniel looked at me. What does that mean? Richard opened another section. 8 years ago, Robert and Evelyn amended the trust. Daniel frowned. I remember Dad changing something after the business problem. Apparently not everything. I saw anger flash across Daniel's face. What did he change? Richard looked at me first. I nodded. He expanded Evelyn's discretion over ultimate distributions. Daniel stared. Explain that. Your mother has substantial authority to modify how remaining trust assets are allocated. Rebecca stopped moving. Daniel blinked. Allocated between who, beneficiaries, and permitted charitable interests, subject to the trust terms. Daniel looked at me. You can change what I inherit? I didn't answer immediately. Richard did. Yes. Yes. How much? That depends on the amendments Evelyn chooses to make and the assets remaining. Daniel's voice became quieter. Can she remove me? Richard answered carefully. The trust gives Evelyn broad discretion. I'm not going to provide you personal legal advice about your expectations because I represent her. Daniel looked stunned. For months he had been planning around a future he considered stable. A house worth nearly $800,000. Savings, investments. The assumption that after I died, what remained would flow naturally to him. Now for the first time he understood that assumption was not a guarantee. Rebecca looked at me. Are you threatening to disinherit Daniel because of Thanksgiving? No. Then why are we talking about this? Because Daniel said the house would be his someday anyway. He was upset. So was Robert when he heard Daniel say something similar 8 years ago. Daniel looked sharply at Richard. Richard reached toward the cream-colored envelope beside the trust folder. He didn't hand it over. This letter belongs to Evelyn. Daniel recognized his father's handwriting. His face changed. What is that, a letter your father wrote? To Mom? Yes. When years ago? Daniel stared at me. What does it say? I felt sadness rather than satisfaction. It says your father loved you. Daniel swallowed. And it says he worried that when you became afraid about money, you started treating family security like something you could count on. Daniel looked away. Rebecca touched his arm. He pulled it back. I continued. Your father wrote that inheritance should remain a gift until the day it is given. Mom. He also told me never to let love turn my security into someone else's emergency fund. Daniel closed his eyes. For the first time that morning, he had no argument. Richard quietly closed the folder. Rebecca finally asked the question hanging over the room. So what happens now? I looked at her, then at Daniel. He looked frightened. Not because I had taken something from him, because he had finally realized I could make choices he had never included in his calculations. I'm not selling my house, I said. Daniel's face fell. The investment deadline is not my responsibility. Rebecca stiffened. And the $250,000 number, one word. No explanation. No apology. Just no. Daniel stared at the table. Then he asked quietly, "Are you changing the trust I thought about Charlottesville? Blue Ridge Haven, Unit 214. The Thanksgiving dinner, where there had been room for everyone except me. And then I thought about a conversation I had during that weekend that neither Daniel nor Rebecca knew anything about yet. A conversation that had given me an idea for what part of Robert's legacy could become. Yes, I said. Daniel looked up. I believe I am. Rebecca went pale, but neither of them understood the real surprise. I wasn't planning to destroy my son's inheritance. I had found something far more meaningful to do with part of it. And strangely enough, I had discovered it only because Daniel had sent me away for Thanksgiving. The twist they never expected. Daniel stared at me as though I had just announced I was giving the house to a stranger. You're changing the trust I'm considering changes. Because I asked you for a loan, no. Because of Thanksgiving, no. Rebecca leaned forward. Then because of what I looked at both of them. Because this experience taught me something about what I want my money to do after I'm gone. Daniel's expression hardened. That sounds like the same thing. It isn't. Mom, 2 weeks ago you weren't talking about changing anything. That's true. And now suddenly you are. That's also true. So something changed. Yes. What I thought about Charlottesville. Not Blue Ridge Haven. Something else. Something Daniel knew nothing about. You sent me somewhere I never planned to go. Daniel frowned. What does that mean when you told me there was no room at Thanksgiving? You suggested Charlottesville. You wanted me to see Blue Ridge Haven. I thought you'd like it. I did. Rebecca looked surprised. You did? Yes. That seemed to confuse both of them. I almost smiled. They still believed the argument was about whether Blue Ridge Haven was a good place. It never had been. I thought Unit 214 was beautiful, I continued. The community was impressive. If I ever decide I want that kind of lifestyle, I would consider it. Daniel spread his hands. Then what are we doing here? Because liking a place doesn't mean you get to choose when I leave my home. He looked away. But something else happened while I was in Charlottesville. I glanced at Richard. He knew what I was about to say because I had told him the previous afternoon. On Thanksgiving morning, I met a woman at the inn. Her name was Helen Carter. I had first spoken to her over coffee because she noticed me sitting alone. At the time, I knew only that she was from Maryland and visiting her sister. What I hadn't told Daniel or Rebecca was that Helen and I spoke again the next morning. After my tour of Blue Ridge Haven, I returned to the inn carrying the glossy folder Allison had given me. Helen was sitting near the fireplace. She saw the folder. Shopping for a new life, she asked. Apparently my son thinks I am. I meant it as a joke. Helen heard something underneath it. She asked if she could join me. We talked for almost an hour. Helen's sister Carol volunteered with a nonprofit organization outside Charlottesville called Second Door Housing Network. The organization helped older women facing housing instability. Some were widows. Some had gone through divorces late in life. Some had spent decades depending financially on husbands who died without adequate planning. And some had experienced something that made me uncomfortable the moment Helen described it. Financial pressure from adult children. I remember staring at her. What kind of pressure? All kinds. Helen told me about one 73-year-old woman whose son convinced her to sell her home and invest most of the proceeds in his business. The business failed. The woman ended up living in a spare bedroom in someone else's house. Another woman signed over control of property because her daughter insisted managing everything would be easier. Eventually, she discovered decisions were being made without her. Does that happen often? I asked. Helen gave me a sad smile. more often than people talk about. The stories disturbed me. Not because Daniel had done those things. He hadn't. He had never forged my signature. He had never stolen money. He had never tried to legally take control of me. But I recognized the beginning of something dangerous. The belief that an older woman's security was available for negotiation because family needed it. Helen said something I couldn't forget. Most women don't lose independence in one dramatic moment. Sometimes they surrender at one reasonable request at a time. One reasonable request. Move somewhere easier. Sell a house you don't need. Free the equity. Help your child. Loan the money. None of those things sounded monstrous. Together, they could change a life. I returned my attention to Daniel. The woman I met introduced me to an organization called Second Door. Rebecca looked confused. What does that have to do with us more than I expected? Daniel's eyes narrowed. Are you giving them money? Eventually, yes. Rebecca's mouth opened. Daniel stared at me. How much? There it was. Not why. How much? I noticed Richard noticed too. I haven't finalized everything. Mom. What? How much? A significant portion of what would otherwise remain in the estate. Rebecca leaned back. You cannot be serious. I am. Daniel looked genuinely wounded. You're giving my inheritance to strangers. The phrase was so perfect that I almost couldn't believe he had said it. Richard shifted slightly but remained silent. I looked at my son. Your inheritance. Daniel immediately realized what he had done. You know what I mean? Yes, I said. I finally do. Mom, come on. No. Listen to yourself. I leaned forward. You just called money I haven't left you yet your inheritance. Because I'm your son. And he stared at me. I continued. Being my son means I love you. It does not mean everything I own is waiting in storage until I die. His face reddened. That's not what I think. Then why did you plan around my house? We've already been through this. Yes, and apparently we needed to. Rebecca interrupted. This is punitive. I turned toward her. What is changing the trust? Why? Because you're doing it after an argument. No. You weren't doing it before. I also hadn't met these women before. Rebecca shook her head. This is unbelievable. Richard finally spoke. Rebecca Evelyn is entitled to determine her estate plan. I understand legally. Then what are you objecting to family? The word hung in the room. I looked at her. Those women have families too. Rebecca fell silent. I continued. Some of them spent 40 years raising children. Some cared for husbands. Some worked. Some stayed home. Some saved every dollar they could. And when they became older, people started treating their security like excess. Daniel rubbed his forehead. So now I'm financially abusing you. I didn't say that. That's what you're implying. No. I held his gaze. I'm saying I recognized a road I don't want us to travel. His expression changed slightly. That was the truth. I did not believe Daniel was evil. I did not believe Rebecca woke each morning wondering how to steal from me. I believed they were frightened, overextended, ambitious, and slowly convincing themselves that because I had more than they thought I needed, asking me to rearrange my life for their benefit was reasonable. Robert had recognized the same danger. I said your father didn't change the trust because he hated you. Daniel looked down. He changed it because he loved both of us enough to understand that love sometimes needs boundaries. Daniel's voice became quieter. So what are you doing? I looked at Richard. He opened a folder. We're exploring a charitable trust structure, he explained. Nothing is finalized. Daniel looked back at me. For Second Door, yes. How much? This time I answered. Enough to matter. That's not a number. No, because I haven't decided the number. Am I getting anything? Rebecca closed her eyes. Daniel heard himself too late. I felt sadness move through me. Daniel, I'm asking. Yes. I currently intend for you and your children to remain beneficiaries. His shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly. But I continued, You will no longer be able to assume that nearly everything left after my death automatically goes to you. Why? Because I want part of what Robert and I built to protect women who weren't as fortunate as I was. I touched the envelope containing Robert's letter. Your father protected me before I even knew I needed protection. I looked toward the window. If part of our estate can give another woman time to find housing, legal advice, or enough support to keep her independence, that feels like something Robert would understand. Daniel didn't answer. Rebecca did. So we lose the investment, and strangers get the money. I turned toward her. You're combining two completely separate things. They don't feel separate. They are. I spoke slowly. You are not losing $250,000 because I never gave you $250,000. Rebecca's face tightened. And Daniel is not losing an inheritance because the money is still mine. Silence. That was the center of everything. They were grieving money they had never owned. Richard closed his folder. There's another important distinction, he said. Evelyn is not required to finalize any estate changes today. Daniel looked at me. So this is a threat? No. Then what is it, a decision? Those sound pretty similar from where I'm sitting. That may be because you're still sitting in the wrong place. He frowned. I continued. You're looking at my estate from the position of someone waiting to receive it. I touched my chest. I'm looking at it from the position of the person who spent a lifetime building it. Daniel looked away. I felt no triumph, only exhaustion. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. Rebecca gathered the papers sharply, shoving the market analysis and Blue Ridge Haven timeline back into her folder. Daniel barely spoke. At the door, he stopped. So you're really saying no to the loan? Yes. The deal may collapse. I'm sorry. You could save it. I thought about Robert. Then I answered carefully. That doesn't mean I should. Daniel stared at me for a moment. Then he walked out. Rebecca followed. The door closed. I sat down again. My legs felt weak. Richard poured me a glass of water. You all right, no? He nodded. That's probably normal. I thought setting a boundary would feel stronger. Sometimes strength feels terrible while you're using it. I looked at Robert's envelope. I still love him. Of course you do. What if he thinks I chose strangers over him? Richard sat across from me. You didn't. I know. You chose not to finance his investment. Yes. And separately, you chose to consider helping people through your estate. Yes. Daniel may need time to understand the difference. I hoped he would. Because the strangest part of all was that Daniel had accidentally given me something. If he had invited me to Thanksgiving, I might never have gone to Charlottesville. If he had not pushed Blue Ridge Haven, I might never have carried that folder into the inn lobby. If I had not been sitting alone, Helen might never have spoken to me. And if none of those things had happened, I might never have discovered Second Door. Daniel had sent me away because he wanted my house to become money. Instead, that weekend taught me something much more important. My home was not simply an asset to protect. What Robert and I had built could become protection for someone else. And for the first time since Thanksgiving, I understood that this story did not have to end with what my son tried to take from me. It could end with what I chose to give. The chair he finally saw. Daniel did not call me for 23 days. I counted. Not because I wanted to, because mothers count absences even when their children are grown. The first Sunday passed without our usual call. Then the second. Then the third. I told myself I didn't care. That was a lie. Every time my phone rang, some part of me expected his name. Instead, I heard from Sophie. She called twice the first week. Neither time did she mention the meeting at Richard's office. I was grateful. I had no intention of making my granddaughter choose sides in a conflict she had never created. The first time she called, she wanted help with a school essay. The second time she asked whether I still had Robert's old gingerbread recipe. Your grandfather didn't have a gingerbread recipe, I told her. Yes, he did. He had a box. She laughed. No. He bought the expensive mix and transferred it into a glass jar, so everyone thought he made it. There was silence. Then Sophie whispered, Grandpa was a fraud. I laughed so hard I had to sit down. For 10 minutes, everything felt normal. Then Sophie asked quietly, "Are you and Dad mad at each other?" I chose my answer carefully. "We disagree about something important. Is it because of what I told you on Thanksgiving? No. But if I hadn't said anything, Sophie..." I stopped her. "Your father and I are responsible for our relationship. You are not." "Okay. You didn't cause anything." "Okay." I could tell she didn't fully believe me. So I added, "And I never want you to feel like you have to report what happens in your house to me." "Understand, yes. I mean it. I know. I love Daniel too much to recruit his daughter against him, even then. Especially then." Rebecca contacted me once. Her message arrived 9 days after the meeting. "The financing window is closing. I hope you understand this decision affects more than Daniel." I read it 3 times. Then I put my phone down. An hour later, another message came. "My parents were prepared to help because they believe family supports family." That one hurt. Not because I believed I had done something wrong, because I understood what Rebecca wanted me to feel. Guilt. I typed several responses and deleted all of them. Finally, I wrote, "I hope your investment works out, Rebecca. My answer regarding the loan remains no." She never replied. Richard later told me the deal appeared to have stalled. I didn't ask for details. The investment belonged to Daniel and Rebecca. Their consequences needed to belong to them too. Christmas approached. For the first time in my life, I did not know whether my son would spend it with me. That was harder than Thanksgiving. At Thanksgiving, I had been shocked. By Christmas, I understood exactly what the silence meant. Daniel was waiting for me to soften, and perhaps some part of me was waiting for him to apologize. Neither happened. I spent Christmas Eve with Patricia. On Christmas morning, Sophie and Lucas came over for 2 hours. Daniel stayed in the car when Rebecca dropped them off. I saw his face through the front window. He looked toward the house once, then away. I almost walked outside. Almost. Instead, I opened the door for my grandchildren. Boundaries. I was learning were not dramatic walls. Most of the time, they were quiet decisions not to repeat old patterns. 3 days after Christmas, someone knocked on my front door. It was raining. I expected a delivery. When I opened the door, Daniel stood on the porch. Alone. His coat was wet at the shoulders. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I stepped aside. "Come in." He wiped his shoes automatically on the mat. That small habit nearly broke me. Robert had trained him to do that when he was 6. Daniel walked into the living room. "Coffee." "Sure." We went to the kitchen. I poured 2 cups. Daniel sat at the dining table. Robert's chair was across from him. For a long time he stared at it. "Dad always sat there." "Yes. I haven't sat at this table in a while, not since last Christmas." He ran his hand along the edge. "There's still that mark." I knew which one. A small burn near the corner. "You made it." "I did not." "You absolutely did." He almost smiled. "How you were 16. You put a hot pan directly on the table. Dad blamed the manufacturer. Your father lied to protect you." Daniel laughed softly. Then his face changed. "Seems like he did a lot of protecting." I sat across from him. "Yes." Rain tapped against the windows. Finally, Daniel said, "The investment is dead." I waited. The lender pulled back. "I'm sorry. Are you?" "Yes." He looked at me skeptically. "I didn't want you to fail, Daniel. You just wouldn't help me succeed." "That depends on your definition of help." His jaw tightened. For a moment I thought we were about to repeat the same argument. Then he looked at Robert's chair again. "I was angry at you." "I know. I'm still angry about some of it." "I know that too. But..." He stopped. I waited. I lied. The words were quiet. "About Thanksgiving." "Yes." I didn't move. Daniel rubbed his hands together. There was room. Hearing him admit it hurt more than discovering it myself. Why he looked down. "Rebecca's parents were coming to discuss the investment." "I know. We needed them to contribute." "I know that too. Rebecca thought if you were there you'd ask questions." I felt something cold move through me. And you probably would have said you weren't selling." There it was. No excuse, just truth. Daniel continued. Rebecca said it would make the whole conversation awkward. I stared at him. So you removed me from it? He closed his eyes. Yes. From a conversation about my house, yes. About my money, yes. And you told your children I chose not to come. His eyes opened. Yes. I had imagined this confession for weeks. In my imagination, I always had something devastating to say. Something that would make Daniel understand exactly how deeply he had hurt me. But sitting across from my son, all I felt was sadness. Do you know what hurt most? The money, no. He looked surprised. Not the $250,000, not Blue Ridge Haven, not even the trust. Then what you decided my voice was a problem. Daniel looked away. You didn't want me at Thanksgiving because I might say no. That sounds terrible. It was terrible, I know. No, Daniel, I need you to understand. My voice shook. You could have asked me for money. I know. I might have said no. I know. You could have been disappointed. We could have argued. He nodded. But instead you decided it would be easier if I wasn't there. His eyes filled. I continued. You didn't just remove a chair from Thanksgiving. You removed me from a conversation about my own future because my opinion was inconvenient. Daniel covered his face with one hand. I'm sorry. The words came out broken. For several seconds I said nothing. Then he looked at me. I kept telling myself I was helping you. Did you believe that at first? And later he swallowed. Later I think I needed to believe it. That answer was more honest than anything he had said since this began. He looked around the dining room. I drove past here twice before coming in. Why I didn't know what to say. You could start with the truth. I'm trying. He took a breath. When Dad bailed me out years ago, I promised myself I'd never need that again. I listened. When this first property started struggling, I panicked. Robert's letter flashed through my mind. When Daniel becomes frightened about money, I thought the new deal could fix everything, he continued. Rebecca believed it too. So you looked for money? Yes. And found mine. His face tightened. I didn't think of it that way. I know. That's the part I'm ashamed of. I said nothing. Daniel looked toward the staircase. I grew up here. Dad paid this house off. You have savings. And somewhere along the way I started thinking that because I'd probably inherited eventually using some now wasn't really taking anything. There it was. The belief beneath everything. I know. He gave a sad laugh. Dad knew too. Yes. Did he think I was a terrible person? No. How do you know? Because he wrote that you weren't. Daniel's eyes filled again. He actually wrote that. The first thing he wanted me to understand was that you weren't a bad man. Daniel looked down. That almost makes it worse. No. Yes. Because he knew exactly what I'd do. He knew what fear could make you do. The distinction mattered. Daniel was quiet. Finally, he asked, Are you still changing the trust? Yes. He flinched. I continued before he could speak. But I'm not cutting you out. He looked up. This isn't revenge. Then what is it, a boundary? I leaned forward. You and the children will remain part of my estate plan. But I am also creating something through second door in your father's name. Daniel nodded slowly. I've been thinking about that. Good. I still don't like it. You don't have to. That surprised him. But I understand why you're doing it. For the first time I believed we might someday be all right. Not today. Maybe not soon. But someday. Daniel looked at the empty chair beside him. Then you forgive me, I took my time. Yes. His shoulders dropped. Then I added, but forgiveness isn't the same as trust. He looked at me. I know. Trust has to come back slowly. I know. And I'm not rescuing you financially. I know. This time there was no anger in his voice. I reached across the table. After a moment, Daniel placed his hand in mine. He was 42 years old. But for one brief second, I remembered the little boy who used to sit at this table swinging his feet because they couldn't reach the floor. I loved that boy. I loved the man too. But loving him no longer meant protecting him from every consequence. Daniel squeezed my hand. I'm sorry there was no room for you. I looked at him. There was room. He closed his eyes. I know. That's why it hurt. Outside, the rain continued falling. Inside, nothing had been magically repaired. The investment was gone. The trust would change. My relationship with Rebecca remained strained, and Daniel still had financial problems he would have to solve without me. But for the first time since Thanksgiving, my son was sitting across from me without asking for anything. No money, no house, no sacrifice, just a chance to begin again. I wasn't ready to give him back all my trust, but I was willing to leave one chair open. There will always be room. 1 year later, I woke before sunrise on Thanksgiving morning. For a moment, I didn't know why. Then I smelled coffee. I opened my eyes and smiled. The house was quiet, but it was not the silence I had known in Charlottesville. This silence was temporary. Soon there would be footsteps on the stairs, the front door opening and closing, Sophie laughing too loudly, Lucas pretending he was old enough not to hug his grandmother, Patricia arriving with something I had specifically told her not to bring, and Daniel asking where I kept utensils he had been using since childhood. But at 6:15 that morning, the house belonged only to me. I put on my robe and went downstairs. Robert's photograph stood on the shelf near the dining room. "Happy Thanksgiving," I whispered. A year had changed more than I could have imagined. I still lived in Richmond. That fact surprised Daniel less now than it once had. The roof had not collapsed. The yard had not defeated me. I had hired someone to clean the gutters and another person to handle the heavier landscaping. Apparently, being 69 did not require surrendering your home. Sometimes it simply required hiring a man with a ladder. Blue Ridge Haven still sent me occasional emails. I read them. I had nothing against the place. Maybe someday I would move there. Maybe I wouldn't. The important thing was that someday would be mine to choose. The biggest change in my life had happened because of Second Door Housing Network. After several meetings with Richard and the organization's director, I established the Robert Martinez Housing Independence Fund. I chose the name carefully, not the Evelyn Martinez Fund. Robert had protected my independence years before I understood why I might need that protection. It felt right that his name should help protect someone else's. The fund would become larger through my estate eventually, but I didn't want to wait until I died to see whether the idea mattered. So I made an initial contribution. Not enough to endanger my security, enough to begin. The fund provided short-term housing assistance, legal referrals, and emergency support for women over 60 who were at risk of losing stable housing. Some had lost husbands, some had lost marriages, some had lost savings, and some had simply trusted the wrong person with too much control. I volunteered twice a month. At first, I worried the stories would make me cynical about family. They didn't. They made me clearer about the difference between love and surrender. Daniel and Rebecca had a difficult year. I knew only what Daniel chose to tell me. That was intentional. After the investment deal collapsed, they were forced to confront the problems in their existing property. They eventually sold their share. They lost money. Not everything, but enough. They canceled a planned kitchen renovation. Rebecca traded in her expensive SUV for something more practical. Daniel stopped talking about investments for a while. Most importantly, they paid their own bills. There were moments when I could have helped. I didn't. That was harder than I expected. When Daniel told me they might need to delay part of Sophie's future college savings contribution, my first instinct was to write a check. I could afford it. Then I remembered Robert. Helping someone stand was different from making sure they never fell. Sophie was not losing the opportunity to attend college. Daniel and Rebecca were simply being forced to adjust. So I kept my checkbook closed. And something surprising happened. They adjusted. Daniel took on additional responsibility at work. Rebecca increased her listings. They created a budget. They sold things they didn't need. The crisis that once seemed impossible became something they survived. Without my house, without my $250,000, without Robert appearing from the grave to rescue his son again. Daniel and I rebuilt slowly. He began calling on Sundays again. At first, our conversations were careful. Then one day we argued about football. I knew we were improving. Rebecca took longer. For several months she remained polite but distant. I didn't push. Eventually she called me herself. I owe you an apology, she said. I didn't make it easy for her. What for? There was a pause. For treating your house like a transaction before you had decided it was one. That was enough. Not because it erased everything. Because it named the problem honestly. Trust did not return all at once. It came back in small deposits. A phone call. An apology. A respected boundary. A question asked before an assumption was made. By November, I decided I wanted Thanksgiving back in my house. Not forever. Just this year. I called Daniel. I'm hosting. There was a pause. Then he said, "Are you asking no?" He laughed. "All right. I want you, Rebecca, Sophie, and Lucas here. We'll be there. And Patricia, of course, and Rebecca's parents if they want to come." Daniel went quiet. "Really?" "Yes. You don't have to do that." "I know. That was precisely why I wanted to. I wasn't rebuilding the old Thanksgiving. I was creating a new one." At 9:30 that morning the doorbell rang. Sophie came through first. She was 17 now and somehow taller every time I saw her. "Grandma," she hugged me hard. Lucas followed carrying a bag of dinner rolls. "I brought vegetables." "Bread is not a vegetable. It came from wheat. Go inside." Rebecca entered with a casserole. She kissed my cheek. "Thank you for having us. I'm glad you're here." Daniel was last. He carried a pecan pie. I stared at it. "You bought that?" "Yes. You didn't even try to hide the box. I'm learning honesty." I laughed. Robert would have loved that. Around noon, Rebecca's parents arrived. Patricia came 20 minutes later, carrying 2 bottles of wine and a sweet potato casserole. "I told you not to bring anything," I said. "You're 69, Evelyn. You should learn by now that I don't listen." The house filled with sound. Exactly the way it used to. Not the same people, not the same relationships, but the same warmth. At one point I stood in the kitchen doorway and watched Daniel helping Lucas carve the turkey. For a second I saw Robert. Not literally. In the angle of Daniel's shoulders, the concentration on his face. The way he told Lucas to keep his fingers away from the knife. Grief does strange things. It can disappear for hours and return through someone's hands. I looked away before anyone noticed my eyes filling. When it was time to eat, Daniel began extending the walnut table. "Mom, where's the extra chair in the hall closet?" He disappeared. A minute later he returned carrying it. Then he stopped. He looked at the table, at the chairs, at me. I knew exactly what he was thinking. 1 year earlier he had told me there was no room. Now he was standing in my dining room adding one. Daniel set the chair down. Then another. He moved them carefully, making sure everyone had space. Finally he stood beside me. "Mom." "Yes." His voice lowered. "I'm sorry I ever made you feel there wasn't room for you." The room around us seemed to soften. I touched his arm. "I know. No." He shook his head. "I want to say it properly. Everyone else was busy carrying food. Nobody seemed to notice us." Daniel continued. "There was room. I just didn't want to hear what you might say." I nodded. "That's true. And I'm sorry. I forgive you." His eyes filled. "So we're okay." I smiled. "We're getting there." He laughed softly. "I'll take it." We sat down. For a moment, everyone talked at once. Patricia wanted gravy. Lucas wanted rolls. Sophie was taking photographs. Rebecca's father was arguing that turkey needed more salt. Normal family chaos. Then I looked at Robert's chair. For decades, I believed the greatest thing Robert and I would leave behind was this house. Later, I thought it might be our savings, the trust, security, something measurable. I had been wrong. Robert's greatest gift to me was understanding that love without boundaries could become something unhealthy even when nobody intended harm. He had protected my right to remain myself. That Thanksgiving, I understood something else. I had spent too much of my life believing belonging meant being invited. It didn't. If someone only makes room for you when you are useful, agreeable, generous, or silent, that is not belonging. And if the price of keeping your chair at someone else's table is surrendering your voice, the chair is too expensive. Sometimes you have to stop asking whether there is room for you. Sometimes you build your own table. I looked around mine. My son was there. My grandchildren were there. Rebecca was there. Friends were there. Even Robert, in the way memories allow the people we love to remain. Nothing had returned exactly to what it was before. I was grateful for that. Daniel had learned that inheritance was not ownership. Rebecca had learned that family planning could not happen without family consent. And I had learned that saying no did not make me selfish. It made my yes mean something. After dinner, Daniel helped me clear the plates. As he carried them toward the kitchen, he stopped beside Robert's photograph. He looked at it for several seconds. Then he whispered something. I couldn't hear the words. I didn't ask. Some conversations belong between a son and his father, even when one of them is no longer physically there. Later, after everyone had gone home, I returned to the dining room. Crumbs covered the table. Glasses waited beside the sink. Someone had left a napkin on the floor. I should have been exhausted. Instead, I felt peaceful. I placed my hand on the back of the chair Daniel had added. 1 year earlier, I thought the worst thing my son could do was tell me there was no